A bright flash of a star pierced the night sky over one of the megacities of planet Earth. The city lived its own life. Tall skyscrapers soullessly rested their tops on the starry space of the sky. People were scurrying about the streets, preoccupied with their own affairs and problems. Suddenly, a shrill, frightened female scream was heard over the city. A cute black-haired guy, sleepily rubbing his eyes, got out of bed, not understanding what the noise was and what was happening. But the scream was coming from somewhere very close. It was coming from a woman in the same room. Now she wasn't just screaming, she was asking who he was. The guy finally woke up and saw an angry and at the same time frightened girl wrapped in a sheet in the other corner of the bed. She hugged herself and angrily demanded who the hell he was, what he wanted and what he was doing in her room. What's more, in her bed. The guy blinked his eyes in confusion, not understanding at all what kind of situation this was. Fragments of memories flashed through my head. There he is, somewhere in the vastness of the universe. Bright flashes of explosions. The pale monster bares its vampire fangs. A terrifying monster, resembling a devil, throws blue lightning bolts from its eyes. It seems he fought with the third overlord. And what happened next? A sharp pain limped through his brain. The guy grimaced and grabbed his head. The next flashbacks flashed before his eyes like an old movie. Two people in black masks ordering him to get out. They won't let a freak bastard become part of the family. One of them leans over the boy and asks why Roy thinks he has the right to bear the name Thorn. He himself lies on the floor, exhausted and beaten. The masked men continue to dig at his defenseless, mutilated body with their feet and threaten to kill him. The boy gradually restored in his memory the picture that preceded his awakening. He himself, it seems, was reborn in the body of an earthly man. The girl turned out to be not so defenseless. Seeing that the stranger was confused and not going to attack, she grabbed a pillow and threw it at his head. Direct hit! The guy lost his balance and fell out of bed on end. The girl was beside herself with rage. Her expressive blue eyes were flashing lightning. It was her first time. How was the guy going to atone for his guilt? From the outside, it looked pretty funny. The girl, like a formidable Amazon, sat majestically on the bed, and on the other side lay a helpless guy upside down. An incomprehensible noise made both of them fall silent and turn in the direction from which it came. Several pairs of feet were stomping loudly down the hallway. Someone was urging them to move faster. All these men were chasing a sensation. Someone wanted to take a photo of the bastard sleeping with the first beauty Lily. Another wanted to tell the owner that there was another man with his girlfriend. The girl immediately assessed the situation. Things were bad. If anyone found out, the company would suffer, and her fiancé, Richard Maine, would kill her. The guy also realized what was happening. They were here together for a reason. It was a trap. The real owner of the boy's body probably doesn't know this girl. Roy didn't have his memories. He and Lily were drugged with something and thrown here to get rid of both. But who could wish Roy's death? The big guys were talking behind the door. Thanks to Mr. Steven, they got an exclusive tip. And now they will have interesting material that will help them advance up the career ladder. Roy heard the last name. He remembered being pushed into a room and thrown face down on the floor in front of a tall, strong man with neatly combed-up blonde hair. He watched with a sly smile as the boy was being bullied. The husband rose from his chair, came closer, and looking at the boy, wondered out loud what the old man saw in him. Roy raised his face to the man with an effort, trying to understand what he was talking about. He ordered me not to hatch and called me a freak. It was Stephen Thorne. Now, standing half naked in the middle of a strange room and next to a strange girl, Roy clearly understood that it was Stephen Thorne who had set this trap. The guy began to be engulfed in flames. The first of its tongues stretched across the room, covering things and objects. Fire swept through a potted plant on a table in the middle of the room. At first, he seemed to want to swallow it, but then he changed his mind and reached towards the open window. He crawled out. He was also visible from the street. The flames then began to engulf nearby buildings and spread through the city streets. Passers-by looked up in confusion, trying to understand what was happening. The flames danced in the flower beds on both sides of the road. They even drove the rats out of their usual hiding places in the garbage bins. Then, dancing, he rose high above the city and gradually moved into the forest thicket. There, on the lawn, the tongues began to wind like a thread on a ball, forming at first incomprehensible and then increasingly clear outlines of a human figure. A moment later, Roy stood in the middle of the forest, still in the arms of the fire. The guy raised his head to the sky and laughed a terrible, devilish laugh. At the same time, flames poured from his eyes, engulfed his handsome face, and embraced his athletic figure. The guy laughed for a long time, and this laughter rolled like a terrible wave through the dark night forest, and then suddenly stopped. Roy repeated the name thoughtfully, Steve Thorne, and then he resolutely moved with a quick, confident gait towards the city. Here and there, the last sparks of the recent flame were still running through it. At the same time, the door to the girl's room suddenly swung open from a blow from one of the young men. She screamed desperately that she was being killed. The men stopped in the middle of the room, looking around in confusion. Miss Lily was sitting on the bed, wrapped in a blanket. There was no one else there. Only a few drops of fire were trembling near the window. However, no one paid attention to them, except for the girl. She jumped up in fright. After all, only here was... What about the plant? Was it really that dry? The night continued. The moonlight flooded the sleepy buildings, but not everyone in the city was resting. There were two people standing near the car. One of them lit a cigarette and looked up at the skyscraper. It was Stephen Thorne. Tomorrow he expected racy photos of Roy with Richard Maine's girlfriend to be splashed across the front pages of every tabloid. Would the old man be able to save the boy this time? The young man standing next to him looked at Steve with admiration. To get Roy drunk and arrange for all the work to be done by other people's hands. What a brain this Mr. Steve has. What a clever man he is. The phone rang. The guy told the owner that the call was from reporter Mike. Steve waved him off, letting the guy do the talking. But let him send a couple of photos. I really wanted to see the face of that son of a bitch, caught red-handed. The young man answered the call, but what he heard made him feel hot. Sweat broke out on his face and ran down his shirt collar. Steve asked with displeasure what the problem was. The guy, locking himself in, said that only Lily Lan was in the room, and Roy Thorne was not there. Steve frowned. This is impossible. He abruptly snatched the phone from the guy's hands and screamed into the receiver that this was all nonsense. Roy couldn't have been there. He personally locked those two in the room. The reporter made excuses but stood his ground. The room was turned upside down. The guy wasn't there. Suddenly, Steve fell silent. The street lamp illuminated the Roy he hated. He stood in a deliberately casual pose and listened to the conversation. Then, lazily drawing out his words, he said that he knew whose handiwork this was. Of course, Stephen Thorne, the heir of the Thorne family. Steve's assistant rushed to the owner, but he barked that he could handle it himself. The guy stopped, mentally cursing the reporters, because they were the ones who let Roy escape. Steve was worried about something else. The head of the Thorne family was going to put this son of a bitch in his place. But it won't happen, never. This trash won't run the empire instead of the old man. If he managed to escape the trap, then Stephen himself will now figure it out. He will simply take and chop him into pieces with his own hands. He pulled a knife out from under his jacket and rushed at the guy. Roy stood calm and focused. It seemed as if neither Steve's words nor actions affected him at all. As Steve approached, he took a few steps back. This made the attacker even more angry. Steve shouted angrily that it was useless to run away because the guy wouldn't get out of here alive anyway. He waved his weapon around randomly and advanced on the guy. Roy finally got fed up with this circus and looked at Steve mockingly. And the next moment, with a sharp movement, he grabbed him by the throat. Steve didn't even have time to croak. Roy leaned over the enemy's face and, increasing the pressure, ominously whispered that this Steve would not get out of here alive today. Roy would simply swallow him. Steve gritted his teeth and tried with all his might to stay conscious. There was a critical shortage of air. His eyes darkened, blood pounded dully in his temples, and in front of him was no longer Roy, but a real devil. His eyes glowed blood red and flames blazed around the boy, blowing out behind his shoulders in fiery dragon heads. The freak wondered what Steve would taste like, and it was no longer a hand that was holding Stephen's neck, but a fiery, blazing pike. What was that? The mind refused to believe what it saw. It was probably due to oxygen starvation. Suddenly, the grip on his neck loosened. There might not be another chance, so the man was not going to lose this one. He jerked, lost his balance, fell, crawled away on his knees while trying to get up. When he succeeded, he ran away with all his might, without looking back. Steve ran to the car, yelling at his assistant to move faster. The car took off, kicking up dust as soon as the door slammed behind them. Roy had no intention of pursuing them. He stood there and calmly watched his rival flee. The car raced along the night streets, cutting through the darkness with the light of its headlights. It was safe here, but Steve couldn't stop his hands from shaking yet. He was furious, and thought that next time he would deal with the impudent impostor. However, he was afraid, because he could not understand what he saw. Was it real, or just a hallucination? The driver called and pointed to the ceiling. Steve looked up and saw a fire sign, like a spiral with brackets around it. Their jaws dropped because they both knew it wasn't supposed to be like that. All this time, Roy stood under the beam of light from the lamp. In his hand, he held exactly the same sign as the one in the car. The sign was glowing and shimmering red. Suddenly, the guy clenched his hand into a fist, crushing the symbol so that tongues of fire, like blood, splashed out to the sides. Stephen Thorne realized that the sign had appeared for a reason. Things were taking a serious turn. He needed to get out of the car. While the driver was trying to pull over to the side of the road, slowing down, the fire engulfed the interior of the car. A moment later, the car flew into the air and exploded. Stephen lay face up in the middle of the road, with car wreckage raining down around him. The husband was living out his last minutes. He opened his eyes with great effort, looked at the sky for the last time, and said that this son of a bitch was not a man, but a real devil. That was his last opinion. And then came darkness. Roy peered into the distance, as if he could see what was happening in the car. He decided to let Steve go this time, calling him not by his name, but a pathetic worm. But if next time he decides to cross the guy's path again, death awaits him. And Roy headed down the night street. Having reached the river, he stopped. The full moon and bright stars set the mood for reflection. How could this happen? And Tracy, this charming beauty, and smart too. She just wanted to protect the guy. That's why she followed him without thinking. She didn't want wealth or power. She just wanted to be with Roy. Where is she now? Lost somewhere between worlds. A devilish monster separated them. Roy screamed and searched for her, but in vain. And then he was reborn. And now he is in another world, not even guessing whether she's still alive. But Tracy couldn't just die. This daring girl managed to defeat the third empress of the starry sky. Therefore, she should have survived other troubles as well. With these optimistic thoughts, Roy waded into the water up to his knees. Let Tracy wait. Her older brother, the Demon Emperor, would definitely return. The wet flames flowed from the boy into the river until the boy disappeared. Only red ribbons of fire floated downstream. In the thickness of the water, the ribbons of flame began to unwind and transform. Roy, having formed into the body of an earthly youth, decided that although human bodies were weak, they could be useful. Their vital energy is great taste. He will take all this energy for himself. Taking the form of an embryo and releasing fiery pikes, he began to savor it. At the same time, all the fish in the river floated upside down. During the day, an elderly man is fishing on the same river. Behind him stands a strong guy in glasses, and a little further away is a guard of several broad-shouldered young men. A girl is sitting nearby. She is bored. She reproaches the old man for not having time to recover before he went fishing. This is what the family was afraid of. The old man, laughing, replies that he feels quite cheerful and full of strength and that he is in excellent health. The guard assures the girl that there is no reason to worry. After all, her grandfather once headed a special forces strike force, and he is still going strong. The girl, whose name is Gina, sighs thoughtfully and agrees. Indeed, why worry? Grandpa is a former military leader. Uncle Nick is simply irresistible in hand-to-hand combat. Who would dare to approach when these two can easily take down 20 to 30 people with their bare hands? Suddenly, the float started to shake. It's biting. The old man shouted joyfully and excitedly pulled the fishing rod towards himself, hooking the prey. The rod bent dangerously into an arc, the line stretched taut like a string, but nothing emerged from the water. The catch seemed to be of a large size. The old man jumped to his feet and, hoping for a rich catch, began to pull with all his might. He was not going to let his catch go just like that. With all his might, the man pulled the rod. Suddenly, something incredibly huge dropped from the water, shot up into the air, and landed nearby. All three froze with their eyes wide and their mouths open in surprise. It was, my God, it was a guy, and not a drowned man. He was even quite alive. He was sitting in the middle of the embankment and holding his head in his hands, which he had hit the pavement with when he landed. The old man and his entire retinue rushed towards him. But halfway there, the head guard Nick shielded them with his body and ordered them to be careful. It could be an enemy. He sent 3 fighters to reconnoiter. The old hand gesture tried to stop them. However, it didn't work. The guy turned his head and briefly glanced at the attackers. A moment later, a powerful explosion scattered them like rag dolls. Roy grabbed one of them by the throat. He looked into her husband's eyes and sternly asked why they had attacked and who they were. The head guard, Nick, froze in shock. How did this guy manage to defeat all the guards? It was impossible. He jumped up and rushed forward. The old man and the girl hiding behind him tried to stop Nick, but it was impossible. He had already seen the last of his team lying motionless on the ground. Nick was not going to give this to a stranger. He picked up speed and jumped with furious force and kicked the enemy in the face. The guy fell. Direct hit! What is this? The enemy is safe and sound. He blocked the blow. He gets up, looks at Nick with an angry look, and asks if Nick is really in such a hurry to die. Nick frantically tries to figure out how his opponent managed to block the attack if he didn't even move. Meanwhile, the guards, scattered by the explosion, came to their senses. Nick directed them to attack. The young men rushed forward with the tenacity of fighting dogs trying to surround the opponent. However, Roy was already engulfed in a strange haze of fire. The attackers had no chance. The guy knocked one out, kicked the other one away. He punched the third one in the face, almost knocking out his brain. He spun around madly, hitting his attackers before they could get close. Nick was sneaking up behind Roy. He decided that this was a good chance and did not want to neglect it. But the guy with his devilish sense understood where the danger was approaching from. A fiery glance over the shoulder. An explosion of incredible power. Everything around was covered in thick smoke. And from this smoke, Nick's indistinct black shadow flashed upward. When the dust and soot settled, the old man hurried to his chief guard, who was lying on his back and barely breathing. Nick urged the gentleman and his granddaughter to run quickly, because things were bad. Roy stood a little further away. It seemed that his arm was broken, or rather, not his, but the guy whose body he was using. Perhaps in this world one should not get excited, but gradually accumulate strength. Roy voiced a complaint that his clothes were damaged, so he wants compensation. This left the old gentleman stunned. Was the guy really not here for revenge? But he quickly realized that he needed to befriend the man who had blocked Nick's blow with one touch. This could benefit the Bai family. So the old man, smiling sincerely, handed the stranger a card with money and apologized for ruining his clothes. He asked the guy's name and if they could be friends. Roy replied that his last name was Thorn, but he was puzzled by the phrase, "become friends." He did not understand what exactly was meant. And also, looking at the old man, Roy realized that his time was running out and the end was already near. He said it like that. Like, the old man is still strong and full of energy, but his death is near. All three froze at the guy's brazen statement. Nick was the first to recover. He started forward, but the old man stopped him with an imperious gesture. Roy turned his back on them and walked away. The woman couldn't stand it. She raised her eyebrows angrily and then screamed that he was crazy. He has no right to talk such nonsense about her family. Then she stamped her foot and shouted into the guy's back that everything would be fine with them. Roy narrowed his eyes. Without stopping, he said on the go that it was his job to warn. And if they want to believe, let them believe. If they don't want to, no need. The old man analyzed. When the boy approached him, it seemed as if he could kill with one touch, as if it were an ancient creature. Was it a vision or the truth? Nick had no doubt. The boss's intuition had never raised before. But was it possible that this guy was so dangerous? The old man replied that it was real, and asked if Nick remembered the legend of the great pilot who disappeared many years ago. Nick asked doubtfully if they could be compared. The dialogue was interrupted by Gina. She stood a little further away and called her grandfather to come quickly. The girl showed the fish in the river, and she was dead. Gina didn't understand what had happened, but she felt that it was connected to the guy. After all, he himself appeared from this river. Nick peered into the water and couldn't believe his eyes. The old man looked up. The sky was gray and unfriendly. He thought that his life would be like that too. What if this guy really does have godlike powers? Was he telling the truth about the end being near? Gina perked up. She would definitely find the guy and ask him about everything in detail. Roy walked through the city, approaching the multi-story neoclassical academy building. All the way he caught sidelong glances from passers-by. Some looked at him openly, some glanced furtively, and there were those who chuckled. Roy thought that the previous owner of this body was not on the best terms with people, but it does not matter. In this body, although it was very weak, he could calmly explore the area and observe life in order. Suddenly, someone loudly asked behind his back, if this was the guy who had managed to have fun with the city's most beautiful woman. And why did he decide to go out into the world? The guy stopped and turned around. A young man was looking at him mockingly and impudently, with his hands stuffed in his pockets. A girl was holding his arm. Arthur Breeze and Amanda Travers. Amanda was once Roy Thorne's girlfriend until she met Arthur. Roy loved this girl very much, and separation from her almost killed him. Arthur was teasing Roy. Wasn't it a shame when everyone found out he was illegitimate? But Roy was a celebrity now. Both the Thornes and the Mains were looking for him. The guy didn't pay attention. He calmly listened to all the nastiness, and then said that if Arthur had nothing more to say, he would leave. And, without waiting for an answer or new barbs, he turned around and left, proudly straightening his shoulders. Arthur gritted his teeth in anger, his hands clenched into fists. He had not expected such a dismissive attitude, so he was not going to let his victim go so easily. He grabbed Roy's shoulder with one hand and yanked him toward himself. "No one dares to ignore Arthur so brazenly," Roy replied just as calmly that he simply did not hear the squeak of insects. Here, Amanda exploded in anger. She screamed that Roy should get down on his knees and swear eternal love to her. Maybe then she would forgive him and ask Arthur to have mercy. Arthur smiled and hugged his girlfriend. It's clear. This guy hates him because his girlfriend is with Arthur now. And Roy isn't even worth her little finger because he's a bastard. Memories of the body's former owner flashed through Roy's mind. Amanda ignoring him, Amanda scolding him. Amanda reproaches him. All the time Roy was not what Amanda wanted. The guy cynically stated that he didn't think this girl was worthy of hatred. Arthur can communicate even with the trash that Roy doesn't need at all. Roy doesn't care. Amanda blushed and froze. They were surrounded by passers-by. Some were openly enjoying the altercation. Some thought Roy was an arrogant jerk. Others sympathized with Amanda because the humiliation was so cruel. And some thought Roy would be crushed to dust. And the latter were not very wrong, for Arthur was seething with rage. But who is this bastard? What right does he have to lecture? He and Amanda are truly in love, but he's just a bastard. Nobody needs a nobody. Amanda added fuel to the fire by shouting that Roy was a freak and that such a bastard would never find a girlfriend. Roy laughed. He didn't care. But a joke like that was the perfect match for an idiot like Arthur. At this point, Arthur broke into a fight. He ran after them, fists raised to strike. Roy walked forward calmly. But the fiery essence had already begun to flare up. The guy thought that one more step would cost Arthur his life. Suddenly, a clear girl's voice screamed that no one was to dare touch Roy Thorne. Roy stopped, distrustful. Who could stand up for him? It was Gina. She announced to everyone that Roy was her boyfriend, and if anyone touched him, they would have to deal with the Bai family. Arthur was simply stunned by the surprise. How could the heiress of the Bai family be with this scumbag? Meanwhile, Gina and Roy were communicating through gritted teeth. He asked her what she wanted there. She hissed that it was none of his business, but took his hand. People around were surprised. How could the first beauty of the academy be Roy Thorne's girlfriend? This is nonsense. Gorgeous Gina and loser Roy. How can they be a couple? Gina resolutely cut off one of these statements, which was expressed quite clearly, and let others not worry about the details. Arthur asked her not to joke so cruelly. However, he promised that he would never hurt her family. Oh well, that suited Gina. She dragged Roy along with her, calling him her darling on human ears and laughing happily. She had arranged everything for now. But after a couple of steps, the guy stopped, freed himself, and moved back. He approached Arthur and told him not to bother him anymore if he valued his life. And then he leaned almost to his ear and said that he himself had had a lot of fun with Amanda, and now let Arthur take her for himself. Arthur turned green with impotent rage and just gasped for air. Amanda screamed in surprise and tried to justify herself, explaining to her boyfriend that everything was wrong. But Arthur didn't let her finish. With a sharp movement, he pushed the girl away so hard that she flew away and fell on the asphalt. Arthur said he wouldn't deal with a dirty whore. Now Roy Thorne will pay him for the humiliation. Gina and Roy walked along the park path side by side, but they were no longer pretending to be a couple. She asked how he was going to thank her for her help. Roy thought about it. He had no money, no power, the only thing he could pay in kind. That was all he had. Gina even hiccuped in surprise. What gratitude! She helped him, and he treats her so disdainfully. Roy responded by accusing Gina of lying. After all, she pretended to be his girlfriend and deceived everyone. What if he already has a girlfriend? This is a blow to his reputation. It turns out that Gina did not help, but set him up and now must compensate for the moral damage, and also take on the costs of the future wedding. Gina couldn't help herself. What a cheeky fellow. What's wrong with him? Why does he have to be such a scoundrel? Grandpa gave him a card yesterday. Does he really need money? Roy rightly pointed out that it was Grandpa who gave the map, not her, so it had nothing to do with her. The girl, in her rage, began to nervously rummage through her pockets. She stubbornly tried to fish out money there to throw it in the impudent man's face. When she raised her head, Roy was no longer there. "What a bastard!" Gina scolded the guy out loud without choosing her words. He said that her grandfather was going to die soon. She needed to talk about it, but he must have figured out her plans and disappeared. However, the girl was stubborn and determined. She was used to getting what she wanted, so she would definitely find out who this Roy was and what his secret was. Roy walked down the academy corridor. From the open door of one of the classrooms, he could hear a conversation. Two people were discussing him. How dare Roy come back after all he had done? After all, the Main family is aware of the situation, and they promised to twist the legs of the weirdo who slept with Lily, and the Thorne family even threatened not to recognize him. Roy realized that he couldn't sit quietly. He was too conspicuous a figure. He would have to play with these kids. Smiling, Roy walked into his classroom. Arthur was already sitting there. Roy, not paying attention to him, went further to his place. He glanced sideways and thought in surprise that Roy apparently lacked the instinct for self-preservation when he appeared here again. Now Arthur would give him his own personal hell. But suddenly, a fat man, out of breath, burst into the classroom. He shouted for Roy to follow him faster. Roy didn't react. Then the fat man rushed towards him, ordering him not to stand but to run. And how did Roy even come up with the idea to come here? Tired of living? The Main family already knows that Roy is here and they're coming. We have to run. It occurred to Roy that he was very interested to see what the Main family was capable of. He patted the fat man on the shoulder and asked him to relax and not be nervous. "Everything will be great. No need to panic." He stared in response, not understanding anything. He just blinked his eyes in surprise. But then the fat man came to and screamed with redoubled force. "What do you mean, calm down? The Main family's people are coming here. They'll tear Roy to shreds for Richard Main. We need to get out before it's too late." Roy smiled back. Then he grabbed the fat man by the shoulder and pressed hard, sitting him down on the nearest chair. The guy's mouth dropped open in shock. Since when did Roy get such power? But there was no time to explain anything. The door swung open with a kick. Some healthy geezers entered the auditorium. They blocked the exit and asked who Roy Thorne was. Arthur jumped up happily. This was a great opportunity to take revenge on the enemy. He pointed his finger at Roy. There he was, Roy Thorne. Arthur had hoped that when the thugs maimed Roy, he would lose Gina Bai's favor. That's when Arthur would get even with him. The fat man rushed to his friend's defense. He jumped out of his chair, but Roy sat him back down, telling him to calm down. The fat man clapped again in surprise. There was so much power in Roy's hand that he couldn't even move. One of the fighters, who had short gray hair, moved towards Roy. The man peered closely into the guy's face and then asked if he really was the bastard. In response, I received a question. Does he and that junk exist that Arthur Breeze was always babbling about? The big guy's eyes turned into narrow slits. He began to flex his fists. The boy called him useless? Roy held his hands out in front of him in a placating gesture and assured her that he hadn't said that. The man must have misheard, because in fact he had called not only him useless, but their entire gang. Roy was openly amused. The big man froze, processing the information he had received. He didn't understand why the guy was being so impudent. Was he really counting on Ginny Bai's help? Arthur, who had been listening to the argument, thought Roy was an idiot. One of the fighters couldn't take it anymore. He suggested cutting off the young man's ears so that he would finally understand the seriousness of the matter. The gray man spoke. He offered Roy two options. One is to kneel before him and sincerely apologize, calling him Master Gong. Another option is very similar. The difference is that he will be helped to kneel. In this case, the integrity of the arms and legs may be damaged. A fiery cloud had already begun to gather above Roy. He flashed his eyes, which also had a red glow. Sedoy tried to understand what was happening. He even wanted to ask about it out loud. However, he didn't have time because in front of him was no longer a snotty guy, but a scary horned monster. Through the black mask, the chasms of eyes, nose, and toothy mouth glowed ominously. The monster asked the gray-haired man if he was serious. The man looked up and saw the same ordinary guy instead of the monster. What was that? A hallucination? Okay, no time for that now. He'll think about it later. But for now, the main thing is to deal with the bastard. And the gray-haired man repeated again that either Roy kneels or there will be no pardon. The guy laughed in response. Then he walked past the fighters freely and demonstratively calmly, which surprised the attackers. They did not understand the guy's self-confidence. Roy sat down on the table. If the gentleman so asked, then he would also give them the right to choose. He looked carefully at each health. They seemed to be covered in a red haze. The same haze appeared in their eyes. They were no longer determined fighters, but stupid zombies. Roy ordered them to kneel. At that moment, Arthur burst out laughing. Unheard of! This bastard ordered Rick Mayne to kneel? Who does this Roy Thorne think he is? Now he really is in trouble. But Arthur's laughter suddenly died down as all four men fell to their knees in unison. Arthur jumped up to Rick Mayne and started to shake him and try to lift him up. He pushed the man and shook him like a pear, but there was no reaction. The gray-haired man was kneeling with a frozen look in his glassy eyes and did not react to anything. Roy sat on the table and rejoiced. The spectacle was interesting. Then he turned to the gray-haired man and asked if he hadn't come for Roy Thorne. So this is Roy Thorne, the one you need? And he pointed his finger at Arthur. He was dumbfounded. All four fighters rose to their feet. They really needed to deal with Roy Thorne. They returned to Arthur. Their faces did not bode well. Arthur tried to reach their consciousness and explain something with a trembling voice. But Rick Mayne's powerful fist connected with his jaw, knocking him down. Arthur knew it wasn't a joke when he saw Rick's glassy eyes. Rick raised his fist for another blow, monotonously repeating that he had to deal with Roy Thorne. It was necessary to save ourselves urgently. He tried to get up but only managed to sit down, leaning against the table. And he was already surrounded by fighters. They pounced simultaneously. They were hitting with fists, feet, and whatever else they could. They tore each other apart stubbornly, trying to explain how to treat other people's girls. Roy watched the carnage with excitement. Fatso watched with fear in his eyes. He did not believe that all this was really happening. Arthur was ground like minced meat. The blows rained down one after another, not even allowing him to catch his breath. Students looked into the auditorium and couldn't understand what was going on. Did Mayne's people have any complaints about Arthur Breeze? Arthur crawled into the corner by the table and begged to stop. The men stopped for a moment, saw that there was not a single living spot left on him, and decided that the guy had had enough. They turned abruptly and walked away silently. The fat man recovered. He asked if Roy was crazy. Maybe he wasn't a man, but some kind of demon. Roy turned back to leave, but the fat man demanded an answer. The guy said that the fat man was wrong. He is neither a man nor a demon. He is something much more. Arthur managed to get up with great difficulty and hobbled towards the exit of the classroom. At the same time, the teacher appeared at the door. She noticed Arthur's condition and asked in shock what had happened. The guy briefly replied that he simply fell and left. The teacher walked to her seat and suggested that the class begin. Roy looked at her carefully. There was something special about this woman. He could feel it with his devilish sense. She was enveloped in a special fragrance and emitted an unusual aura containing the primordial essence of the 5 elements. It felt like looking at a celestial body. The guy realized that her spiritual energy was many times more concentrated than that of ordinary people. If it were possible to get even a drop of her blood, he would make a magic pill that would essentially be a spare life. Roy concentrated and sent one of his pikes towards the woman. The teacher walked slowly down the aisle. She was just passing Roy when the probe approached her small, neat ass, covered by a short skirt. Just as he was about to bite her, Roy gave the teacher a delicious slap on that spot. She screamed and dropped her book in surprise. The woman turned around deftly and pounced on Roy in a rage. What was he even allowing himself to do? The guy calmly replied that he had nailed an extremely dangerous mosquito to his buttocks, and he readily demonstrated the nailed insect on his palm. The teacher choked with anger. A moment later, Roy was standing in the hallway. He was thrown out the door, but he wasn't embarrassed. He had a trophy. There wasn't much blood, but it would have to be enough. Roy held his prize carefully. It was so valuable that it was definitely worth that slap on the ass. The trapped mosquito was enveloped in a lilac light. Then he turned into a drop of fire. The boy thought, who could have brought to earth a creature that has been found only on the borders of the Forbidden Zone since ancient times? The entrance to the nightclub was illuminated by neon lights. Roy walked inside and walked up to the bar where a fat man, whom Roy called Chubby, was waiting for him. The fat man, leaving his unfinished cocktail, suddenly grabbed Roy in his arms and began to complain that he left his girlfriend because she made fun of Roy. The guy got pretty drunk. Roy pushed him away in disgust. But that didn't stop Puklik. He continued tearfully telling how money wasn't important in life. The most important thing is human feelings, even brotherly ties. The fat man was already sobbing drunkenly, smudging tears across his face. His girlfriend had humiliated his brother, and that couldn't be forgiven. Roy looked mockingly at the fat man crying. Suddenly, Puklik tugged at his sleeve and pointed to the other end of the bar. There stood a bright girl with long red hair and a bust of at least a size 4. She was casually twirling a glass in her hand. The fat man explained that this was Trisha Conway. She owned this bar, and she drank wine called a glass from Big Sister, which costs 10,000 a glass. Puklik raised his hand with a bank card and ordered 2 servings of a glass from Big Sister. Trisha smiled politely and asked to wait a minute. Roy narrowed his eyes at the girl and suddenly told her that she was poisoned. The girl blinked in confusion, not understanding anything. But Roy saw a turquoise aura behind her with his special gaze. Trisha crossed her arms defiantly and asked Roy what he had said. Roy repeated that she was currently under the influence of poison, and whoever did this was nearby. The fat man turned back to his friend with disdain. What kind of nonsense is Roy talking? Trisha looked at the guy questioningly. Roy continued, the one who poisoned the girl is already at the entrance. What is she going to do? And then a young man appeared in the doorway. He walked straight up to the counter, confidently propped one foot up on a chair, and brazenly told Trisha that only he could save her. If she leaves with him, he will help her and rid her of the poison. Roy remembered that the boy's name was Stanley Baker. However, he was often called Poison Wolf. Trisha stepped forward and loudly asked everyone present who could help her deal with Stan Baker. In return, she promised free drinks at the bar. A stocky man, sitting with his head down, responded from the far corner. Stan asked contemptuously, "Is this by any chance the one they call the Invincible Fist of the black market?" The man, Cody Anderson, was indeed called the Invincible Fist. Stan advised him to keep his head down, but Cody had already risen from the bench and was standing in front of the young man. Smiling, he told him not to talk nonsense, but to just die, and he began to flex his giant fists. An unearthly glow flashed in Stan's eyes, then a stream of fire shot behind Coda. He, not noticing anything, swung and aimed at the cheeky youth's jaw, but the fist hit an invisible barrier. Anderson was spun around and thrown in the other direction. Stanley had the same turquoise aura that Trish had around him, fluttering and writhing. He had boldly declared that Cody had only been winning because he hadn't dated Stan, but he was going to fix that now. Stan put his hand far behind his head, and then, with furious momentum, he struck his opponent in the back. The giant spat out a clot of blood and flew forward, not even having time to put his hands out to soften his fall. A moment later, he was lying down and only groaning dully. Stanley placed one foot on Coda as if she were a hunting trophy and asked happily if anyone else would dare to try to help Miss Conway. Everyone around was quiet. Considering what had just happened, there were no more daredevils. Trisha leaned against the bar in despair at Roy and the fat man's. She was confused and saw that no one wanted to protect her. Stan smiled confidently, feeling like an absolute winner. Deciding to put an effective end to it, he, as if playfully, kicked the helpless Cody with his nose. The body flew into the air and crashed into the fat man so hard that he was pushed into the counter. The chair couldn't withstand the double load and crunched under them. They both fell to the floor. Suddenly, Roy spoke up. He asked if Stan knew who he was. Stan was still flickering. He grimaced and replied condescendingly that he had no idea who he was, and he didn't care. Let the guy get out while he was still in one piece. Is that how he treats Roy? Roy's eyes flashed. Stan grinned evilly. This boy is too arrogant. I'll have to teach him a lesson. Stanley began to reach out to Roy, but the boy was wary. He instantly intercepted the attacker and squeezed him so hard that Stan's eyes popped out of his head. My hand literally went numb. He couldn't even move it. This made Stan incredibly angry. What was this brat doing to him, the last one who did this to him? He's been dead for a long time. His hand was free. Stan wanted to give the impudent fellow a punch, but the guy disappeared. He looked around, but did not have time to understand where his opponent had disappeared to. Because I got a good bream from almost nowhere. Roy stood nearby, surrounded by his own devilish red fire, and sent a pulse towards the enemy, knocking him off his feet. The wall slid back to the opposite side of the room. He quickly rose to his knees. His face was covered in blood. His eyes were blazing with hatred. What kind of nonsense was this? How did this young man do this? Why was he so strong? Roy, in the form of a fire demon, moved quickly towards the wall. He saw that danger was near. Without waiting for an attack, he decided to be the first to rush into the attack. Leaning his body forward, Stan rushed towards Roy, aiming to smear him against the wall. However, he crashed into an invisible obstacle. An unknown force turned him around and threw him back like a wave. What the hell is this? I didn't have enough time to figure it out. Roy struck so hard that wall was thrown up a meter and then opened up on the floor. Falling backwards, Stan hit his head hard, almost killing himself with dizziness. Roy, with his hands stuffed in his pockets, casually approached the prostrate enemy and asked if he now remembered who was in front of him. Stan, spitting out blood along with his knocked-out teeth, furiously replied that he should die. Roy burst out laughing. What stubbornness. Then he stamped his foot. A column of fire rose from under the boot. Stan rolled out of the trap and rushed towards Roy. He threw his emerald flame forward. It hit Roy in the chest. The guy staggered but stayed on his feet. Stan laughed excitedly. So this guy is not so invincible. But then Roy, chewing on Stan's aura, said that it tasted quite good. He stared in shock. How could that be possible? Roy shoved his outstretched palm into Stan's face. Everything around was red hot. Then there was an explosion, and the room was filled with thick smoke. When the smoke cleared, there was a huge hole in the wall. Stan was sitting underneath it, breathing heavily. Fatso and Trisha couldn't believe their eyes. They stared in surprise and fear at what was left of the cozy hall. Roy approached his opponent and asked if he wanted to continue the fight. Stan replied that he had had enough. He admitted his defeat. Roy demanded the antidote for Trisha. Stanley dug into his mouth and handed over. My tooth. The tooth was special. There was an antidote inside it. And only then did Stan get the idea of how this guy knew that it was he who poisoned Trisha. The next moment, 3 people entered the hall. Nick walked ahead with a confident, businesslike gait, his arm in a sling. 2 guards loomed behind him. Roy was confused. What do these people want here? A disfigured Stan rushed towards Nick. Why was his brother here? What happened? Nick, looking at his bloody brother, asked what happened. Stan couldn't get into details, but he said that there was a person who didn't respect them. Stan pointed the finger at Roy and blatantly lied that he threatened their family. So he can't let this happen. Nick only just now noticed Roy. He greeted Mr. Thorne. He grabbed his brother by the forelock and kept him from raising his head. Roy politely asked how his hand was. Nick replied that thanks to him, his hand had been saved. Stan just clapped his hands in confusion. He couldn't understand what was going on here. Nick continued to communicate with Roy. He explained that he was actually looking for him. The guy asked again if something had happened to the head of the family. Nick nodded his head vigorously. Everything is happening exactly as Mr. Thorne said. The owner's condition is unstable. His health has deteriorated. Lately, he's been feeling worse and worse, and his body is a total disaster. Roy suddenly continued. Huge black spots appeared on his body. His legs can't hold him up. He suffers from insomnia at night due to cramps. He knew all these symptoms. They were the result of the bite of the satanic mosquito. Nick stared at Roy, dumbfounded. That was exactly it. Perhaps Mr. Thorne knew how to help. Roy smiled. In the past, he would have advised to let the old man die in peace. But recently, young Miss Bai had helped him somewhere. He agreed to repay her for the favor. But preparation takes time, so Roy told Nick to find him in 3 days. The man bowed respectfully and thanked the boy. Stan was dumbfounded. Nick told him to follow all of Master Thorne's orders. If he let Stan live, long live. If he told him to die, let him die. And then Stanley became scared. If even the older brother bows before this guy and begs for help, then it turns out that he offended a rather omnipotent person. To remedy the situation, Stan fell to his knees in front of Roy and congratulated him as the master. Roy casually pointed his finger behind him at the fat man and told Stan to greet him. Puklik racked his brains. Did he hear that? No. Stan was already running towards him across the entire hall, shouting that he was greeting the owner and grabbing his hands. The fat man fought back, but Stan held on tightly to his master. Roy looked at them and thought that Stan did not recognize him. Although he was in the same dimension as Roy, I wonder how he got to Earth in the first place. But that question could wait. The satanic mosquito was a more pressing issue. As they all left the nightclub, Chubby fought off Stan, who was trying to take his master home. Roy quietly turned in the opposite direction. He quickly walked away and was wondering where to go now, when suddenly he saw a familiar figure ahead. Was that really Lily Lan? It was really her. But what is she doing here? Why is she alone? The girl walked along the sidewalk, not paying attention to anything, not noticing Roy. She waved her purse serenely and thought about something of her own. A car overtook her and braked sharply. A man leaned out of the window and grabbed her hand. He was not averse to having fun with such a beauty. Lily didn't understand anything, but she reflected. This inflamed the man even more. He was in the car with his friend. The two of them were pulling the girl towards them with all their might. She resisted desperately, but the forces were unequal. One of the attackers covered her mouth, the other grabbed her by the legs, and they quickly dragged the girl into the salon. Lily's slender legs were still sticking out of the unlocked door, but the car had already taken off. Roy realized it was a kidnapping, and just in case, he decided to follow them, dashing after them like red lightning. The car parked near a luxurious country house with a wide-open terrace. The men got out of the car. One of them threw the kidnapped girl over his shoulder. After today's kidnapping, the damn bastard will spend the rest of his life behind bars. The door to the estate was opened for them by a short, mottled guy named Sam Jones. They carried the girl to a prepared room. They threw her on the bed. Lily was unconscious. The man who wore it smiled sarcastically. The girl really deserved the title of the first beauty. He had never seen such tiny ones before. But now you can have fun to the fullest. He suggested that the others start in turn, but on the condition that he would be the first. Suddenly, someone behind them said that they shouldn't take turns. It's better to do it all together, so that we can all die together. The surprise effect worked, but not for long. The leader of this gang quickly came to his senses and decided that the presence of the bastard was even to their advantage. He laughed cheekily and invited Roy to come in and make himself comfortable. They would let him watch the show, and then, of course, blame him for it. Roy called the plan mind-blowing. The men ordered the gentle Big Sam to deal with the intruder. He obediently rushed at Roy. But something went wrong. Instead of slamming his fist into the guy's impudent face, his hand fell into emptiness. And then his back was unbearably baked, as if it was being fried. And indeed, his back was being fried. Roy launched his flame behind Sam's back, and he was burning alive. When the fire reached the head, the burns screamed and begged for help. The accomplices stopped in their tracks. What the hell was this? None of them had ever seen anything like this in their lives. And the events in the room were happening fast. Roy was giving Sam a hard time up front. And a moment later, the two men were staring in shock at Sam's corpse, from which smoke was rising. Roy's eyes flashed an ominous red light. Who hired these thugs? The men fell to the floor before him and begged him to have mercy on them. They were only following Steve Thorne's orders, but they would never cross Roy again. The guy said they could go free. However, of course, he had no intention of letting them go. The flames engulfed both of them instantly and intensely, so strong that a minute later, 2 more corpses were smoking in the room. Roy was about to leave, but at the last moment, he noticed something flashing on the floor. It was some small thing, bright green in color. Roy sat down next to him and looked around carefully. The matter turned out to be a jade pendant. The pendant emitted an amazing, unusual energy. The boy thought for a moment, and then decisively crushed the trinket, squeezing it tightly in his fist. There were individual crystals lying on the palm of the hand, all that was left of the pendant. Roy realized that this was the Devil Stone of the Heavenly Poles. How lucky! With it, you can control the collection of demonic energy, and the energy will be renewed almost instantly. Lily was still lying unconscious. Roy decided to go to the grove located behind the estate. It was perfect for what he had in mind. Having chosen one of the strong, spreading old trees, the guy stood next to it and took out a jade crystal. Roy knew that the crystal could draw energy from the earth and sky and concentrate it. It was also possible to use the energy of ancient trees and stimulate this process. He squeezed the crystal tightly in his hand. It began to emit light. And then Roy slammed him into the tree trunk with all his might. The crystal seemed to be sucked into the thick bark. Now, with this thing, the trees will start growing faster. And in the future, forest spirits may appear here. The clearing was illuminated with a soft green magical light. The petals that fell from the tree instantly sprouted, took root, and stretched upward with incredible speed. Roy hadn't felt this good in a long time. He felt calm, and at the same time he was filled with energy. Suddenly, Lily appeared on the lawn. She was not very steady on her feet, her body was shaking, but the girl stubbornly walked forward. Roy became worried. He had to forget about her. There was such a crazy concentration of energy here that the girl might not be able to withstand it. But he couldn't do anything now. The girl pounced on Roy, accusing him of abandoning her. The guy walked away in surprise, and they both fell into the thick grass. Lily was on top and took immediate advantage of the situation. She pinned Roy to the ground and demanded an answer. Why had he abandoned her then? The guy couldn't understand what she wanted, but Lily undressed him without explaining anything. It seems she is not adequate. What's wrong with her? She can't be left unattended in this state. Roy gently put his arms around her shoulders. Later, down on the ground, he finally realized that this energy had affected her so much, he needed to release the energy from her body immediately. He lightly touched Lily's forehead with his index finger. It was as if she had exploded. Her body tensed up and she began to scream. Her blouse fell to pieces right before her eyes. He removed his finger. She leaned back, exhausted. Roy was thinking hard about what to do. He had only released a small portion of the energy. The lion's share was still inside the girl. There was only one thing left to do. And then Lily, as if reading his thoughts, stretched out her arms, wrapped her arms around his neck, and pressed her trembling body tightly, demanding love. Roy realized that he had no choice and gave in to temptation. Only the ancient tree was a silent witness to their mad night. The morning sky was cloudless and bright. A ray of sunlight, breaking through the dense crowns of the trees, slid across Lily's face. She opened her eyes. Her body ached. The girl suddenly jumped up, not understanding where she was. The surprise was that she was completely naked. And next to her, there he was again, the girl screamed. Is it him? Is it him again? Why is he here? What does he want? Roy rolled his eyes and patiently explained that it really was him, and he had saved her. And could he finally stop yelling? Lily went quiet. A memory flashed through her mind of two men holding her mouth, grabbing her and dragging her into a car. Maybe this guy really was her savior? Okay, she just needed to get dressed, go and forget about everything. She quietly asked him to bring her things. Roy looked upset. It seemed like the girl was just using him. She gave him a surprised look. What was he talking about? But Roy had already gotten up and left. Lily asked, frightened, where he was going. Oh my God, this girl is simply unbearable. And who asked for clothes? Lily was left alone in the grove. She leaned against the tree trunk, closed her eyes, and turned her face to the sun's rays. Her mood was unexpectedly good. She felt light and relaxed. Suddenly her head was covered with a shirt. It was Roy who threw her the clothes. What manners! Was it so difficult to just come up and hand them over? But the young man was not in the mood for ceremony. He ordered her to get dressed quickly and get out of here. Lily's good mood vanished. She barked at Roy to turn away. Pulling on her shirt, the woman asked where they were. The guy replied that it was his house. It was located between the city and the village. Lily thought, it's a long way to the city. Maybe Roy can take her away? The guy was confused. The car was there, of course. It was parked in the yard. But he didn't have a driver's license. Lily wondered how the car drove if he didn't have the right to drive it by himself or what. Roy ignored the jab and offered to take the wheel, especially since he needed to get to town. Let Lily give him a lift as well. The girl snorted. Who should give whom a ride? But she took the driver's seat. Roy thanked him and sat down next to him. Lily was driving, and inside, she was seething with anger. The guy seemed like an idiot to her. She pressed the gas pedal to the floor with her bare foot. The car roared and rushed at a furious speed, raising dust around. Roy wasn't bothered by the speed at all. He enjoyed the ride, looking out the window and smiling. This infuriated Lily even more. Then something on the road caught his attention. A black sports car was catching up with them. He suddenly grabbed the steering wheel and turned it sharply. Lily was furious. Why the hell bother if you don't have a driver's license? She slowed down. The car that was catching up with them drew level and then began to overtake, trying to push them to the side of the road. The girl didn't understand what was happening, but she gripped the steering wheel tightly with both hands. A black car turned right and blocked the road. Lily was forced to stop. Roy's eyes narrowed ominously. He knew what was going on. He knew it the moment he saw the fancy car. Meanwhile, the door of the sports car began to slide smoothly upward. Lily looked out in fear. What is he doing? Roy ordered to stay where he was and left. He was going to pay back an old debt and grab a few more things. Stephen got out of the other car. His whole face was bandaged, but he seemed to feel quite powerful. Stephen was glad that he had finally found Roy. He grinned evilly and pulled off the bandage. Now he looked like a monster. His face was disfigured. Thanks to Roy. So today the guy will die. Roy feigned genuine pleasure at the unexpected meeting, but this was his older brother. Why was he in such a hurry to get out of the hospital? Looks like I'll have to go back there again. Check my head, because there's obviously something wrong with it. Roy's sarcasm stung Steve, but he tried to remain calm. The two rivals stood opposite each other, glaring at each other. The outline of Steve's figure began to glow a bright purple. And a moment later, the same purple whirlwind rushed towards Roy, flashing a couple of centimeters from his head. What kind of tricks are these? Roy was surprised. This was something new and unexpected. Did Steve really change that much while he was undergoing treatment? Steve laughed. He missed a little. He's just not quite used to this thing yet. Purple energy raged around him. This time, Roy prepared himself and met the next blow with a block. And then he swirled his devilish energy into a mad whirlwind. Steve jumped aside. Roy thought he was running away. But Steve grinned and said that the guy was just forcing him to use his trump card. He might as well consider himself a corpse. He wouldn't survive. Steve's face turned into a mask illuminated by purple highlights. Roy realized that this was the mask of the demonic Asuras, which are the Titan demons who are the enemies of the gods. But where did Steve get it from? The opponent waved his arms, sending more and more waves of deadly energy into the air. The air was filled with static crackling and solid purple alarms. Steve's eyes took on a satanic, bloody gleam, and the horns behind his back, which appeared from somewhere, pulsed blood red. Suddenly all this Vermaya burst into a furious fountain. Roy even sat down. Steve Thorne was playing with fire. But was he aware of it? Did he even know what thing he owned? Steve replied condescendingly that it didn't matter. All that mattered was that in a moment, hell would begin for the boy. He would beg for death. Roy cried out in concern that Steve had one last chance to explain where he got the mask, and then Roy would try to help him. No way, Steve couldn't be convinced. A tornado rose into the air. Its color shimmered from dark purple to soft lilac. The funnel was gaining momentum, accelerating with each passing second. It rose high into the sky, and for a few seconds all that was visible was a small, relentlessly pulsating dot. Roy watched her with concern. And then this point hit the ground with a powerful charge. Roy and Steve found themselves at the epicenter of the explosion. Keeping his energy shield up, Roy thought the mask allowed Steve to use about 20% of the full power of the Azure. Lily climbed out of the car and disappeared behind Steve's car. She watched the fight in amazement. I saw a confrontation between two wild energies, and I didn't believe that it was really happening. Steve loomed over Roy, his arm raised high above his head for the final blow. This damned freak was finally going to end. Roy understood the seriousness of the situation. It was impossible to let the opponent get close, because it was really too dangerous. He took a few steps back. The energy blast was coming closer. Steve noticed the movement and shouted at the demon guy not to even think about running. And with a sharp gesture, he threw his hand forward, directing a stream of deadly force straight at the guy. Roy was hit right in the solar plexus and thrown high into the air. Steve's energy flow kept the guy hanging in the air for a moment, and then threw him down with deadly force. Roy screamed. The impact caused the asphalt on the road to rise and turn out into huge chunks. Everything was covered in smoke and dust. Steve raised his hands in triumph and enjoyed his victory. This mask was really cool. His body was filled with unimaginable strength. He really did look like a heavyweight. The muscles on his body bulged and bulged like steel cables. They played under his skin like living creatures, ready to act at any moment. Suddenly, from behind Steve's back, through the thick curtain of smoke and dust, Roy's voice said that it seemed Steve still hadn't figured out what kind of thing he owned. Steven was dumbfounded. He never expected corpses to be able to talk. He saw movement out of the corner of his eye. Roy had appeared. The guy jumped onto the nearest rock and now looked down at his opponent. Asuras are cannon fodder for the lower demons. They are given a mask before battle so that the Asura cannot escape from the battlefield and to raise his fighting spirit. What Steve doesn't know for sure is that the mask can only be removed in two cases, either when its wearer wins or when he dies. Steve brazenly declared that he had enough time to taunt Roy and win the battle. Roy didn't think so, and he wasn't going to wait. He threw a portion of his energy at Steve. His eyes widened in surprise. Steve hadn't expected that Roy had any strength left after his attack. The impact was strong. Steve was thrown off his feet and slammed into the asphalt, creating another crack in the road. Roy mockingly asked if Steve had been hit too hard, worried that his cool toy might break. Steve hissed fiercely. Damn the runt, how he hated him. Let that hatchling die right now, and he launched his energy charges at the swarm from both hands. Another explosion shook the air. Another followed, and another. But the last ones had a black-red gleam. It was Roy's reflection. There was a veil of smoke everywhere. Almost nothing could be seen. Only multicolored flashes here and there tore through the gray haze with incredible brightness. As Steve sent another projectile forward, he wondered if Roy was dead yet. The guy responded excitedly that he would gladly give Steve the right to die first. And he flew up, arms outstretched, straight down at his opponent. The latter thrust out a giant fist. His hand was completely saturated with a lilac glow. But suddenly the glow faded, and tongues of red-black flame began to envelop the hand. Steve screamed in panic. What did that damn bastard do? What was that? The fire was moving quickly down his arm, reaching his body. Steve screamed and promised to finish Roy off even if it cost him his life. The guy would also writhe painfully in his death throes. Roy was already walking away, but he turned around and said that Steve had only one way out, to die, because he was definitely not destined to win. Stephen Thorne roared terribly, like a wounded animal. His face was slapped by the river in a futile attempt to pull off his mask. It was useless. The mask seemed to have grown into his skin. Then the giant made a desperate lunge forward, hoping to grab the boy into his steel embrace. However, the jump was interrupted. Suddenly, the mask began to crack and fall apart. Steve continued to scream, but the tone changed from threatening to frightened. Roy, standing at a distance, commented that this was the end. Steve had failed to keep his mask, so it was time to say goodbye to life. But let Steve thank him, for the boy is going to give him a quick death and spare him the torment. With these words, Roy jerked a clot of fiery energy at the enemy. The mask shattered into pieces with a loud crack. Steve screamed in pain and horror, and then his huge body was pierced by thousands of worries. A second later, Steve's motionless body was frozen forever, face down, disfigured. Roy approached the neutralized opponent to rummage through his head and once again wondered where he got the mask from. He grabbed Steve's transparent energy shell and pulled it upward. It was a soul. It hadn't dissipated after death. It was for the better, less trouble. Roy began to absorb it. She resisted, taking the shape of Steve's face and screaming silently. But soon it was all over. While devouring the soul, Roy suddenly caught a vision. Against the background of one of the galaxies of endless space, the outlines of a human figure emerged. For some reason, Roy thought that this was the heir of the main family. There was silence. It pressed painfully on the ears. After the noise of the battle, the silence was unbearable. Lily moved out from behind the car to see if it was really over. An exhausted Roy was walking towards her. She asked if he was okay. The girl was scared. They had caused such a massacre. Were they even human? And then the girl came across Steve's corpse. Stephen Thorne was dead. Roy nodded. He had threatened them, so he got what he deserved. Roy was surprised and delighted by the girl's reaction. Not everyone could maintain composure in such a situation. He asked if Lily knew where he could get information. She thought for a moment and quickly realized that the Swarm University Library had the largest collection of books. This was the best option. A little later, Lily drove Roy to the university campus. The guy sat thoughtfully and didn't even immediately notice that they were there. The girl's voice pulled him back to reality. She asked what to do with the car. He waved her off, telling her to take the car because he had no right to drive it anyway. Lily asked who he really was. She had seen what a powerful force he wielded. Roy, lost in his thoughts, did not hear the question. But Lily decided not to repeat it. She waved her hand to ignore it. He waved back. As a parting shot, he told her to call him on the phone if she got into trouble. He had already entered his number into her phone book. Lily jerked in surprise. She grabbed the phone and checked it. Indeed, Roy Thorne's number was not in his memory. And when did he manage to do it? But who the hell is this guy, really? Roy walked along the campus alleys, passing people, but not noticing anything around him. The thoughts insisted and did not give rest. There was a feeling that something strange was happening in this world. The mask of Asser and Stanley Baker belonged entirely to his world. But they were here. And how did the satanic mosquitoes appear here? He wanted to dig through the books and find something else interesting. So Roy confidently walked towards the library. He didn't notice how a girl with huge blue eyes and a heart-shaped face looked out from behind a tree behind him and laughed. Roy spent a lot of time in the library, but he didn't find anything interesting. All the records were in perfect order. However, the strange feeling didn't go away. What was going on? And then meek little palms covered his eyes. Guess who? The boy pulled himself free and turned around abruptly. In front of him was it Tracy? His Tracy? The hair color is different, but the face is so similar. She grinned happily. Where had her brother been all this time? She had been waiting for him so much, but decided to find him herself. The boy came to his senses. It was not Tracy, but Linda, Roy Thorne's childhood friend. Where was she? His Tracy. Linda looked closely at his face. What had happened to him? Why was he so confused? But Roy reassured her. He was just thinking. The girl relaxed and began to chatter again. Couldn't he go with her to the birthday party? Her friends had arranged everything. He agreed. Linda jumped for joy. When they left the library, it was already dark outside. They reached a luxurious building in the city center. It was a luxurious and pompous place. He realized that the girl's friends were quite rich. I wonder what connects them with Linda. He'll have to keep an eye on her. The maitre d' met them in the lobby. He asked who they were and invited them to go to the VIP room where they were already expected. Suddenly, Linda became worried. Everything here was so expensive. Maybe she should ask her friends to change places. But Roy reassured her. They were already here anyway. They should go on, not turn back. And mentally, the guy added that no one knows what might happen. They entered a large room with a huge closed table in the center. The three people gathered turned to face them. The rest of the seats at the table were empty. The girl, who was sitting closer to the entrance and had a short, stylish hairdo, ran up to Linda, hugged her, and greeted her. She glanced at Lindy's companion and coquettishly asked who the handsome man was that her friend had brought. Linda blushed and explained that it was her brother, Roy Thorne. Roy looked at the luxurious furnishings of the room and paid no attention to the girls. Linda spoke in a hushed voice to her friend, Susie Lake, about how expensive the place was and how inconvenient it was. Sue assured her not to worry. Gesturing to the young man at the table, she explained that Randon Dwight had covered all the expenses. Linda could thank him if she wished. Randon, a guy with long, wheat-colored hair, seeing that the conversation was about him, saluted the birthday girl with his glass and said that it was for her. Linda shook her head and waved her hands in panic. No, no, she doesn't drink alcohol! Susie began to persuade her to take at least one sip. Suddenly, Roy snatched the glass from Randon's hands and took a swig from it. Then he invited the blonde to come out and talk face to face. He knew it was Roy Thorne. The boys went out into the hallway. Randon casually leaned his elbows on the windowsill and lazily watched Roy walk back and forth. Finally, Roy came up close to the blonde and asked who had sent him. After all, there was a sleeping pill in the glass. What was he going to do to Linda? Randon held himself confidently. He answered the question with a brazen smile. Doesn't Roy remember who he caused trouble for? But since he showed up himself, he'll definitely die now. Roy bared his teeth. One sip wouldn't hurt him, but if the guy didn't admit who sent him, he probably wouldn't leave here alive. Randon stood at attention in front of Roy and said there was no point in trying to stop him. Master Richard Maine had asked me to tell Roy to wait and be afraid. He wanted to laugh, but an unexpected, incomprehensible movement in the air made him fall silent and become wary. Something flashed past him, slightly ruffling his perfectly styled hair. And the next moment it turned out to be a huge monster, similar to a predatory cat with radiant, fiery eyes. The monster sat on Roy Thorne's shoulders and looked at Randon. Roy ordered that Maine be told that he would come to him personally as soon as he had some free time. Let Mr. Maine wait a moment. Randon was squatting, covering his ears with his hands and closing his eyes in fear, but Roy insistently asked if he understood everything. The blonde was shaking and sweating. Horror gripped his body so much that he couldn't even nod, let alone answer. Roy grabbed his head with his hand and pressed. The monster opened its mouth, and now Randon must pay for everything, as promised. He nodded affirmatively and promised to pay everything. The boys walked down the hallway. Roy had Randon's shoulder. He ordered them to take him to Richard Maine. After all, it would be impolite to ignore all his attacks. Randon, locking himself, clapped his hands, saying that he didn't know where he lived. He always called for meetings and appointed the place himself. And where did they usually meet before? The blonde answered fearfully that it was at an abandoned factory. Excellent. Roy's pupils flashed blood red. So they're going there. But first, Roy decided to send Linda home. Her family had always been good to him, and he felt obligated. And Linda reminded him a lot of Tracy. Left alone with Randon, the guy told him to drive the car, and he also added affectionately that if he dared to raise his hand against his friends just once, the losses would be much greater than today. Randon unlocked his car. He thought maliciously that today's situation was nothing. Real men could adapt to the situation, but Roy would soon be finished. On the way to the plant, Roy's phone suddenly rang. The number was unknown. The guy accepted the call. Stanley Baker's voice tried to explain that his master was gone. Roy clenched his teeth. What do you mean, gone? But the car had already stopped on the territory of the abandoned factory. They were there. Roy got out of the car. Randon didn't seem to be going anywhere. He thought he would never dare go there, but he was quietly feeling around in his pockets. Roy mockingly showed him his mobile phone and asked if the guy was looking for it. Randon loomed. How could he have stolen his phone? And more importantly, when and why? Roy replied that he knew who had kidnapped his friend Andrew Scott. This was how Roy should repay them. He used the blonde's phone and offered to talk to someone when they met. The subscriber Roy called stood on the balcony of a high-rise building and replied that he didn't see the point. The guy wouldn't live to see the morning anyway. It was Richard Maine. He ended the call without giving Roy a chance to continue the conversation. Roy listened to the end of call beeps. Too soon, Maine ended the call. No point. The gardens had simply lured him. He squeezed the blonde's phone so hard that it crunched and fell apart. Randon screamed. It was a pity about the phone. Roy realized that coming here was part of Maine's plan. How nice it was when no one cared about him. The blonde angrily said that Roy should have known who he was getting involved with. The Maine family would never give him peace. They were terrible people. Roy smiled. He was grateful for the information. But now he didn't need Randon anymore. The blonde worriedly asked what he meant, and the deadly energy of the swarm was already moving above their heads. At the last moment, Randon felt something. He tried to look up, but he didn't have time. A powerful explosion cut everything off. Roy said goodbye to the blonde and, whistling, walked away from there. Fat Andrew Scott, nicknamed Chubby, was in an abandoned building. He was tied tightly to a pipe. Rick Maine was torturing him, asking about DeRoy Thorne. After all, the fat friend of that bastard should know. Andrew snorted. They want to kill Roy? Are they suicidal? Are they tired of living? God replied that he was aware of the boy's amazing talents. Last time, he had mortally humiliated him with his hypnosis, but now it was his turn to get even. He would kill Roy. God pointed to a guy standing nearby. His brother had sent him to help. This is Mr. Six-Fingered Snake. Ordinary people cannot understand his essence. What does the fat man think Roy has a chance against him? Andrew looked at the snake. He had a very strange aura. What happened next was fast. The door to the room blew out with one blow from Roy. The guy looked around. Richard Maine wasn't here, of course, but Rick might know something. Sidoy rubbed his hands contentedly. His brother was right. The guy really did come himself. Andrew tried to warn his friend about the danger and asked him to be careful, because the six-fingered serpent suddenly disappeared somewhere, and he hung from the ceiling above Roy and prepared to attack. From under the hem of his cloak, a huge snake stretched towards the guy's head, sparkling with mother-of-pearl scales and a poisonous green aura. Roy, noticing the danger, jumped aside at the last moment. The snake drove into the floor with all its might, piercing it as if it were paper. The six-fingered snake descended. Roy taunted his rival. Why did Richard Maine send some run-of-the-mill snake charmer? He was not provoked. Time will tell who is a private. Six-fingered glowed with a greenish radiance. Suddenly, a snake jumped out from under Roy's feet and opened its mouth right in front of the guy's nose. What is that? A cultivator? Six-fingered hovered. What other cultivator? Roy's predatory cat bit the reptile in half. Roy told him not to bother. He'll explain about the cultivator later. But did he bring just one snake? Six-fingered narrowed his eyes angrily. Did this freak decide to reflect his methods? Roy laughed and thanked her for the idea. Then he threw a huge ball of his red and black energy at her. Six-fingered was not touched. The swarm energy froze around the opponent, not reaching its target, as if it had encountered an invisible barrier. Six-fingered flashed his snake eyes and threw his hands forward. From there, huge vipers grew in place of his palms. He shouted that Roy was now a dead man and ordered the vipers to destroy the enemy. Roy commanded his predator that there was food available. He prepared for the attack. The guy watched the movement of his beast. It's good that a drop of the teacher's blood, when interacting with life energy, showed signs of intelligence and gave birth to a civet. After all, he wouldn't need an assistant. Six-Fingered snorted. "Just some children's toys. Now we'll see whose beast is cooler." And he ordered his snakes to attack. They obediently rushed forward. The civet jumped too. Six-Fingered moved his fingers, directing the actions of his watch, and believed that Roy's life was also in his hands. Roy pointed out sarcastically that this was still a huge question. Six-Fingered had very little control over his snakes. He had to stand still to control them. The opponent stared in surprise. Could it be that Roy had no control over his beast? The boy burst out laughing in response. "No need to humiliate him to your level. He is completely free." And he attacked Six-Fingered, jumping forward impulsively. He was thrown back by the blow. The situation was getting tense. What kind of creature was this guy? Six-Fingered could not break contact with the snakes. All his strength went into controlling them. Roy wasn't going to explain anything. The enemy was too weak anyway and would hardly be able to understand anything. He struck again. Six-Fingered, shocked, asked where the boy had studied, perhaps in the League of Perfection. Roy replied that he came from hell. The opponent brazenly declared that he would definitely send him back. Let the guy prepare to die. A giant snake cutting through the air flew towards Roy. The guy moved two fingers almost imperceptibly. Two giant blades divided the snake into three parts. Six-Fingered spun around on the spot as if scalded. One of his sleeves was torn to shreds. He hissed and cursed. His face was red with pain and rage. Roy was egging his opponent on. Why was he so red? What embarrassed him? Six-Fingered nervously twisted and waved his arms, hastily calling his kites. They froze for a moment. Then they reached out to the owner. Six-Fingered grabbed their heads with his hands. A moment later, the snakes changed color to fiery. They became fiery reptiles located on both sides of the owner. A red python with one giant eye appeared above them. This was Six-Fingered's main trump card. The python opened its toothy mouth and darted forward like a cobra. Roy called his civet. It immediately assumed a waiting position. The python rushed towards Roy, taking him into the focus of its clumsy eye. The guy didn't move and calmly waited for the attack. The next second, an open mouth hung over the guy and an explosion occurred. Rick Mayne, who had been watching the fight the whole time, joyfully shouted that Roy's day had come. The only thing that upset him was that he died too quickly. He didn't let me enjoy his suffering. The python raised its head high. Roy was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, the reptile's neck began to swell and grow, and then it burst like a balloon, and out popped a large baby head. He opened his toothless mouth and screamed at the top of his lungs. He was hungry. The snake was a wonderful meal, so the creature immediately began to feast on it. Roy emerged from the smoke. He headed towards Six-Fingered, who was crying over his dead snake. But suddenly Roy noticed movement on both sides of him. It was Rick Mayne. The guy grinned at him and stared at him with a terrible, devilish look. Hundreds of red pupils were jumping in his eyes. Let Rick just dare to do something to Andrew Scott. And don't even think about running away. The gray-haired Klyak is in place. Roy turned to Six-Fingers. Had he told him before that he came from hell? Roy grabbed his opponent's hand and asked him not to die too quickly. His scary eyes glowed even brighter. He pulled with all his might. Six-Fingered let out a piercing squeal. Roy replied that he was glad to welcome him as a guest in hell. Six-Fingered whined, begging not to kill him. They could come to an agreement. Let Roy Thorne have mercy and not kill. He is ready to do whatever he is ordered to do. Roy was adamant. He looked at Six-Fingered, and he saw his own death in the boy's eyes. But then Roy winked slyly and said that Six-Fingered could actually do something for him. He chipped in, not believing his ears. Anything that was needed. Anything. Roy accepted his devilish nature, and a sinister smile flashed on his fiery face. Anything? Okay, then Roy wants Six-Fingers to be the bomb. Roy laughed wildly. He was delighted with his brilliant idea. Six-Fingered sweated and trembled. Become what? Roy touched the boy's finger. Lightning pierced him from head to toe. He screamed wildly in pain. His body began to break and twist mercilessly. He did not understand what was happening, tried to resist, and screamed. However, the devilish force inexorably did its job. She continued to twist and squeeze the guy until he turned into a small, compact ball. Roy picked it up and looked at it thoughtfully. What a cool trick. A bomb made of flesh and blood. That's just super. While throwing the ball, just a minute ago, the Six-Fingered snake, Roy glanced sideways at Rick Mayne. He was still standing where he had just ordered him to stop. Andrew shouted that Rick could not be allowed to escape, for he would never stop hunting Roy. The guy untied his friend from the ropes with a discreet gesture and asked him to wait and rest. As soon as he dealt with Rick, he would immediately take care of him. The wounds needed to be examined. Sadoy was afraid. He was afraid to move. He was afraid of Roy. He was afraid to die. He offered to negotiate. Roy took him by the chin, turned him towards himself, and looked straight into his eyes. Of course they will agree. Right now Roy will give a present to his brother. With these words, the boy shoved the living bomb right into the ice hole and made Riku swallow it. God clapped at Roy in fear. What is this? The guy explained that it was just a little surprise. He instantly hypnotized Rick. Now the gray-haired man blinked with a frozen gaze and repeated the same phrase about a gift for his older brother. Roy ordered him to leave. Chubby Andrew looked at Roy with distrust. Why did they have to let the bandit go? Nothing good can be expected from him. He approached his friend and praised him for holding himself up so well. He sighed helplessly. Nothing special. He just knew that his friend wouldn't betray him and he would have to save him. Roy placed a reassuring hand on Andrew's shoulder and squeezed it gently. Then he told him to get up and go home. Puklik asked about his wounds in disappointment. Couldn't Roy help him? But then he realized that the wounds were gone. They had all healed instantly. Miracles. How did Roy do it? But Roy was already heading for the exit. Andrew ran after him and bombarded him with questions. How did he heal his wounds? Why did he let Rick go? Was he afraid that the Mains would set a trap again? Roy only joked that he didn't feel it. Richard Main lived in a modern high-rise building in a prestigious area. God took the elevator up to the right floor and shuffled along the corridor, repeating in a low voice the same phrase about a gift for his older brother. The two maids looked at him with astonishment. They decided that Rick had been having fun with prostitutes all night. That's why he looked so strange. The girls must have been really hard on him. The year paid no attention to anything. He passed one corridor and turned into another, repeating the same thing. Then he entered his brother's room, and he was still muttering about a gift for his older brother. Richard Thorne stood in his office with his back to the door. He held a glass of wine in his hands and thoughtfully looked out the giant window at the city at night. Hearing Rick enter, he asked how everything went without turning around. Perhaps Roy Thorne died tragically? And he couldn't help himself. A smile stretched his lips. For a year, he continued to talk about a gift for his older brother. Richard came back to him. What was he babbling about? He didn't like the look of his brother. The year had been strange, too amazing. Richard came closer. What happened? Where is the six-fingered serpent? Why isn't he with Rick? The gray man stood motionless for a moment. Then his head suddenly jerked. His neck twisted at an unnatural angle. Bizarre bumps protruded from his temples. He flashed his frozen eyes and shouted that he had brought a gift for his older brother. Richard called his name, but suddenly a sense of danger arose. He kicked Rick in the stomach with all his might and started running. Richard screamed as he ran. What did his brother bring with him? God put his hands forward, as if for an embrace, and again spoke about the gift. Richard was furious. Something had to be done quickly, but there was no time. The river had already lifted up an incomprehensible force. It enveloped the man in a dense ball, which continuously crackled with electric discharges. Rick's body bulged out. He called his brother. Richard started to run. God was at the door. There was only one way out, the window. Richard Main flew into it at full speed, breaking the glass with his own body. The only thought that kept pulsating in my head was that Roy Thorne had to be destroyed. The next moment, a powerful explosion tore through the silence of the night. Roy had an appointment with Fanny Braxton. The guy couldn't understand why she invited him. It seemed a little suspicious to him. But he went to the meeting. Perhaps this will help to find out something about the Main family's intentions. Fanny was standing at a table under the window with a strange girl. Noticing Roy, she waved her hand, inviting him to come over. She introduced the stranger as her good friend, Bethany Lowe. She thanked the guy for agreeing to meet and explained that Bethany wanted to ask him a few questions. All three sat down at the table and sat in silence for a while. The girls looked at the boy and said nothing. Roy was the first to lose his temper. He asked why the girls were staring at him. It looked like they were going to have lunch. Was he wrong? Fanny burst out laughing and explained that she had told Bethany how Roy had saved her from the satanic mosquito. Fanny had begun to feel uneasy, so she decided to treat Roy to a nice dinner. The guy said he understood, although in reality he didn't understand anything. Bethany spoke up. She was a doctor and the head of a medical center. She wondered how Roy knew so much about mosquitoes at a time when so little was known about them. Roy shook his head. He couldn't explain anything to her. The girl frowned. If he refused to explain anything, then the conclusion was that the appearance of the satanic mosquitoes was somehow connected with him. Roy was offended, but tried not to show it. He stood up calmly, thanked them for their hospitality, and turned around. Fanny was taken by surprise by his reaction. She jumped up from her seat and screamed at him to stay. The boy didn't pay attention. Fanny from Bethany ran after him all the way to the exit, but they couldn't stop him. Once outside, Roy stopped in surprise. The road was blocked by a dozen young men in identical formal black suits and ties. They lined up in a chain. A short, bald man with a small, neat mustache appeared between them. He stood out in his gray suit. The man watched Roy with a sharp, intent gaze. "What the hell is this? Who are they?" The husband stepped forward, bowed slightly, and introduced himself as Alex Bai. He congratulated Mr. Roy Thorne and asked him to help them again. Bethany Lowe rushed forward. She wanted to explain to Bai that this guy had come from nowhere. But Alex looked at her with a stern gaze and asked her not to speak in such a tone about the respected guest of the Bai family. Roy agreed to leave with Alex. He knew that time was against them and they needed to hurry. Bethany didn't calm down. Now she asked permission to watch Roy heal. If everything went well, she would prefer to become his student. Roy waved her off. Let him do as he pleases, so that the Bai family won't have any objections. No one noticed the man standing around the corner watching them. When everyone was seated in the car, the man called on the phone and reported that Roy had left with the Bai family's men. His interlocutor turned out to be Richard Maine. He ordered to continue watching. In front of him was a photo of Roy Thorne. How Richard hated that damned freak. All the troubles are because of him. Last night an explosion destroyed the apartment building where Richard lived. He miraculously managed to survive. And he won't give this to a guy either. Well, actually, this is already a corpse. All that's left is to decide how Roy Thorne will die, and that decision will be made by Richard Maine. Roy and the girls were brought to the Bai family estate. Everything here was striking in its spaciousness and luxury. Bethany whispered that Roy shouldn't try to experiment on the gentleman. She was his personal doctor, so she had the right to insist on it. The guy confidently answered that she should watch carefully, because he was going to cure the old man without any experiments. They were brought to Mr. Bai's room. Alex thanked Roy again for agreeing to help his uncle. The old man was in a very bad way. The ditch's left hand was already engulfed in red-black fire. He also summoned the civet. But then she appeared, peering out from behind her owner's shoulder. Alex was almost speechless with surprise. What is this? But the guy, calming the crowd, explained that this was the key to salvation. So there was no need to react so sharply to his little pet. Roy asked to bring him some kind of vessel. Alex passed the order on. A moment later, the plate was brought. The guy held it under the civet's nose. Then he grabbed her by the paw and squeezed out a few drops of blood. The girls recoiled in shock. Roy ignored them. He handed the plate to Alex and ordered him to give the old man some of it. It would help. Alex felt hot. Sweat poured down his bald head like bricks. Drinking the blood of this monster, was that really necessary? Roy coolly confirmed that he understood everything, and then added that in the future they should be more careful with the Maine family. These words caused even more horror. Roy saw panic on the faces of Alex and his retinue. He didn't understand this reaction. Were they really that afraid of the Maines? But why? A girl's voice came from the door. It's not the Maines they're afraid of, but the Lennons. The Lennon family is behind the Maine family. They are very powerful. It was Gina. Roy repeated after her thoughtfully. The Lennon family. And inside, a devilish light was already slowly flaring up. Suddenly, he stood up in bed and asked in surprise what Roy had just told him. Was it really true? Was it really all arranged by the Maine family? The guy replied that there was still a lot to clarify. But he knew one thing for sure. Satanic mosquitoes were creatures from another world. Brittany's face fell in surprise. Another world? But who is this guy? Roy continued. There's no point in delving into this matter. Sooner or later, everything will become clear. It's enough to be on guard. The Maines are crazy, but they won't get into an open conflict. The boy stood by the window. Gina came up to him. She was grateful for saving her grandfather. Roy waved his hand. He was more interested in the black cars lined up at the entrance to the yard. They were definitely not the Bai families. The girl suggested that they might belong to the Maines. The boy asked the old man to lend him his car. The head of the Bai family ordered Ginny to lead the guest and give him a silver swallow. She called Roy to follow her and led him out of the estate. A minute later, the gate opened slightly and a silver car drove out. The people from the black cars began to bustle about and rush to intercept them. The Bai family's guards came out of the gate and tried to stop this. The men in the black cars shouted at them not to interfere with the main family's orders. A skirmish ensued. The local guards threw the strangers out into the street, and what right did they have to raise their hands on someone else's territory? They were too arrogant. Suddenly, a real brute burst into the yard. The giant was more than 2 meters tall and almost as wide. They wanted Roy Thorne. They'll leave the Bai family alone once they get the guy. One of the guards recognized the man, great name David Shaw. He tried to object, but the big guy said they would either give the guy up voluntarily or they would be forced to do it anyway. He towered over the silver car like an ancient colossus. Roy was sitting at the wheel in the car. He asked mockingly why this giant had been sent alone to deal with him. The big guy clearly had no diplomatic talent. He wasn't going to discuss anything for long. He threw his hand forward sharply, intending to grab the guy. Roy defended himself with his energy. The energy flows collided. Health David looked at Roy with curiosity. And the guy is strong. No wonder Mr. Main warned him to be careful. One guy is worth an army. But it doesn't change anything. He's going to get into trouble today anyway. He laughed heartily, as if it was the best joke he'd ever heard. Roy laughed too. What a freak this carcass is. Let him try to catch up first. The car squealed its tires and jerked forward. Roy managed to shout "Papa" to everyone and disappeared from sight. The dumbfounded people of Maine stood in stupor for a few seconds. But David's stern voice made everyone move forward. After Roy. A silver swallow was flying along the highway. A picturesque landscape stretched out beyond the window. The sun's disk was smoothly sinking behind the mountains. Roy stopped at the forest and went deeper into the thicket. The David Shaw slightly ruffled the guy's aura. Health used interesting tricks, but Roy would analyze them later. Now it was necessary to recover quickly. He approached a wide-brimmed old tree. He settled down underneath it, assumed the lotus position, pressed his back against the trunk and closed his eyes. Energy flowed through his body and pulsed pleasantly. Within minutes, Roy felt strong enough to take on a couple of puny humans. He began to wait for his pursuers. Soon, cars appeared on the road. Roy mentally urged them on. Let them leave faster. Impatience gave him no rest. Finally, the cars stopped next to his car. The pursuers rushed into the forest thicket with the intention of getting Roy. They were careful in the undergrowth. David had ordered them to be attentive. They looked under every bush. However, Roy was nowhere to be found. Aside from the health, one of the men screamed. When David got there, he saw a headless corpse. Zdorov shouted for everyone to immediately gather together. Do not scatter under any circumstances, so that the guy would not have a chance to kill them one by one. His voice echoed throughout the night silence of the forest. Don't disperse. Keep an eye on everything that happens. Watch carefully and catch every rustle. Roy was nearby. He was holding the severed head of one of the fighters and enjoying this game of hide and seek. Swinging his arm, the guy threw the head into the crowd of pursuers. Is this what they are suddenly looking for? All the men froze. They tried to determine by the voice where the guy was hiding. Roy didn't hide much. He shouted that he had completely forgotten to welcome them to his domain, but now he would fix that. And he said that he welcomed them to hell. At that very moment, black and red alarms began to swirl around the pursuers. David cursed. The flames snatched his fighters one after another and pulled them into a whirlpool that kept getting tighter and tighter, leaving less and less space for the big guy. David Shaw shouted that all the swarm tricks wouldn't help him anyway. No matter what he did, he was finished. Roy stepped out of the shadows onto the edge of the clearing. Was he serious about the end? Come on, here he is! Let the tough guy try to get him and finish him off! David was nervous, but he held on. He looked up from under his brow at Roy and said that he hadn't answered his question then. Richard Maine hadn't sent him alone. And a demonic, multi-armed monster with pikes instead of legs, a toothy mouth and quivering devilish eyes rose into the air. The monster roared and threatened, but Roy didn't care. He told David to think he was on his territory. Did he still want to fight? The next moment, the monster's throat was gripped with an iron grip. His eyes widened in surprise and lack of oxygen. Roy yanked him down and threw him to the ground, pinning him with one hand so tightly that he left no chance for him to fight back. David Shaw was clearly not pleased with this turn of events. He said that Roy Thorne would have to die anyway. If he did not want to comply, they would make him. And he threw a clot of shock energy. Roy was thrown back with incredible force, knocking all the air out of his lungs with a sharp exhalation. The freed monster, on the big guy's command, rushed to attack. It ran, pushing off with its arms and roaring threateningly. It was necessary to save himself. To avoid an attack, Roy decided to jump. He soared into the air like a hawk. Suddenly the boy felt his hand catch on something. He passed through David's energy beam. He stood below and actively scurried his web, launching new and new threads of his energy into the air. He smiled with great satisfaction. Roy Thorne is a fool. Oh well, now the bird is in the cage. Roy was tied up in the strong ropes of the monster's arms and legs as it attacked the boy from behind. He resisted and writhed, but the monster's grip was iron. His hideous face leaned toward Roy's ear, and the guy wasn't such a bad opponent. He'd even challenged the North Atlantic Alliance. For that, he'd be granted an easy death. The monster said his name was Chris Fanson. Let Roy remember the name of his killer. The monster opened its mouth and sank its fangs into the boy's shoulder, sucking out blood. It hurt. This damn bastard could suck all of Roy's power. He needed to be dealt with immediately. David Shaw was watching them. He didn't like the look on Roy's face. He warned Chris to stay awake. The guy was obviously up to something. Not expecting any surprises, David struck. It was so shocking that the monster was thrown far back. The guy himself was hit right in the chest and literally swept away by a powerful wave. His unshakable body landed far beyond the clearing. The two monsters were talking. Chris was complaining that David had killed the guy too quickly. He hadn't even had time to drink his blood, and David was waving him off. They approached Roy's body. There was a hole in the boy's back. It looked like he was completely dead. Chris rubbed his hands together happily. He wanted a new toy. The guy would make a great puppet. He tasted like crap, and he had pretty good strength. David stared silently at Roy's body. Something was alarming him. Chris hissed in displeasure. What else did he want? It was obvious that the guy was dead. However, the big guy was in no hurry to draw conclusions. Chris reminded him of something, and Mr. Maine had ordered him to be careful with this guy. He had to be ground to dust to make sure he was finished. David extended his right hand to Roy, which was pulsing with energy. A sharp movement forward. Roy's body was illuminated by a greenish shimmer, and then it merged into the shape of a bright ball. The balloon flew up, leaving a smoky trail behind it. Chris thought with regret that he would not receive a new apostate. High above, behind a veil of smoke, a red-black lightning bolt blinked, but no one on the ground saw it. David said with disappointment that there was nothing special about that guy. Yeah, F rank at most. Why did they send 2 E-rank fighters after him? But at least they'll be rewarded for it. Chris replied that you can't argue with Master Maine. He's part of the Lennon family. And Roy appeared silently behind them. With one lightning-fast movement, the guy tore off Chris's arm. He screamed piercingly. While David was walking back to the scene, trying to understand what had happened, Roy was behind him preparing for the next blow. He asked loudly why they used the alphabet to rank fighters. His health took a turn for the worse. Is that possible? He was hit right in the heart. No one could have survived that. Roy confirmed. Indeed, David had made a hole in it. But that was all. Roy figured out the secret of his punch. It was based on dynamic frequency, and that saved him. Something incomprehensible began to swirl behind the guy's back. David and Chris watched in horror as what was happening. The darkness was forming into something they couldn't identify. David frantically tried to figure out who this guy was who had survived a direct hit to the heart. And something was approaching. There it was, right next to me. There it was, flashing behind the big guy's back. Here it turned into Roy. He held a scythe that glowed with black and blue energy. Roy swung it and cut off David's arm. Now, hello, End. David was crouched and groaning, clutching his wounded shoulder. Chris rushed to his side. But who is this guy? What does he produce? Roy stood in all his glory, enveloped in a bluish aura. They had been too hasty in their judgments about his level of ability. But now he would let them feel the difference between their powers. Both monsters raised their heads upwards. Chris was stunned, trying to guess what it was that was approaching them. The small cloud quickly grew, filling the entire space right before our eyes. It covered the big guy and the monster like a cap. Chris began to rush about in panic. What to do? Roy generously offered them a concession. He could spare one of them, and he would grant them the right to choose which one. The two looked at each other. What kind of nonsense was this? Why would he do this? David assumed the guy just wanted them to kill each other while fighting for the right to be elected. Chris grew up with a nasty wide smile. And that's right. Great idea. At that very moment, David was tightly wrapped in a thick energy scroll. He tore this cocoon apart and quit. It was necessary to act, and it was fast. If the guy had decided to hide in the darkness he had created, David would now lure him out of there. He moved forward decisively. Roy laughed. Didn't the big guy realize that nothing he did made sense? Roy was darkness himself, and David wouldn't do anything about it. Meanwhile, Chris didn't give up trying to kill David to save himself. He crept up on Health in the dark and bit his arm. He waved it off. He threw an energy bomb towards Roy. Roy watched these absurd attempts with joy. It didn't take much effort for him to hold back and neutralize the big guy's attack. David was breathing heavily. Chris was nowhere to be seen. Roy spread his hands. It looks like the two of them decided to die together. Someone cleared their throat behind David. Roy laughed. Well, finally the real Chris Fanson. The monster took the form of a man. Health pounced on him. There was no need to expose his true face. Chris answered gloomily that he just wanted to live a little longer. David countered that the guy wouldn't let anyone go. He nodded briefly that he knew, and he pressed a secret point on the strong man's body. Stop flapping your tongue! Chris wanted to make a puppet out of him as quickly as possible, and to do that, he needed David alive. He had to act quickly before Roy killed him. Roy looked at the boy questioningly. Why this circus? They all understand that neither Chris nor David will get out of here alive. Chris looked at Roy with a defiant look and replied that it was impossible to control a corpse, but a puppet was an impeccable fighter. Some of his apostates surpass people in their abilities. At the same time, he continued to put pressure on David, and he succeeded. David straightened up and stared at Roy. He had a mask on his face. He had become Chris's puppet. Chris ordered an attack. Puppet David rushed forward, radiating a frantic, murderous energy. Roy glanced briefly in his direction. That was enough. David screamed and staggered. Chris watched in horror as his last hope for salvation died. Roy had a scythe in his hands. It shimmered with a blue glow. The guy swung it towards Chris and half of his body flew away. Finally, it was possible to rest. These rivals were interesting, but unfortunately, they turned out to be too fragile. The young man's civet came up to him and he invited her to have some food. The beast rushed to feast on the fresh corpse. Roy then headed towards the energy tree. He dug his fingers into the bark and froze for several minutes. Then he clenched his fists tightly. The tree instantly dried up. The guy went on. A little later, only dry trees were visible around. Roy was forced to raise all their energy to at least restore his strength a little. He should now be about rank A if we use the terms of the enemies he just killed. But he should conserve his strength and not run into trouble. Roy looked in the direction the civet had gone. From there, a silver lion walked arrogantly towards him. Not bad. The guy was pleased with the scale of the changes. Roy looked thoughtfully into the distance towards the city. Would Richard Maine make a good snack? He had some alliance on his side, but he could count on the help of the Bai family. He pushed off the ground with his foot and shot into the sky like a huge black lightning bolt. The lion looked up, and then he jumped inside this lightning, the edge of which was still touching the ground. Roy raced over the sleepy town. He had unfinished business with Mr. Maine, and he was in a hurry. A figure in a chemical protection suit moved through the dead forest among the dry trees. The man looked around and was surprised. 2 E-rank Alliance members were dead, and there was not a single clue anywhere. She dropped her mask and it became clear that it was a girl. Her name was Anna Sheldon. She headed a medical institution and was a member of the secret organization, Aliens. The girl realized that the guy was much more dangerous than they imagined. Therefore, people with extraordinary talents in their organization must be prepared to face a tough fight against Roy Thorne. Anna began to get out of the forest. Suddenly, she saw a clear boundary between the dry and living trees, as if someone had crossed out the forest. How was that possible? She had never seen such surprise before in her life. One of the units of the North Atlantic Alliance was located in a new high-rise building. There was a meeting going on inside. Alliance Communications Master Chester Lee was reporting to Richard Maine that the guy was a real devil. He didn't leave a trace of the 2 E-rank masters. Richard was furious. 1 E-rank master was worth 10 special forces, and there were 2 masters, and they couldn't handle it. He slammed his fist on the table so hard that a piece of it broke off. Richard paced nervously in the office. Chester stood at attention, keeping his cool. He spoke calmly, but with emphasis. Mr. Maine has the blood of the Lennon family in him, but it must not be forgotten that this does not give him the right to give orders. Richard tensed. He didn't like those words at all. He cursed silently, but swallowed the insult. After all, Chester was right. Now was not the time to quarrel with him. He continued more calmly. This is the first time I've met a guy who dared to challenge the alliance. Where did he come from and what does he want? Next time I'll have to act more decisively. Chester replied that there was no need to worry. He was there to sort this out. But there are complications. The alliance is not on the best terms with Demon Gate right now. Where else can you get the best craftsmen? Richard exploded again. He doesn't give a damn about these complications. The alliance is obliged to provide the masters. Let him look for them as soon as possible. That son of a bitch needs to crawl away on his knees and beg for mercy. Chester thought about it. Roy Thorne is no match for even E-rank masters. What can we say about the weaker ones? F-rank will just be cannon fodder. The only normal option was a D-rank master. He knew one. The Bai family estate was impressive in its grandeur. Roy walked through the open gates, raising his head and looking at the huge Baroque house. He didn't want to turn to others for help yet. He would have to rely on the Bai family's loyalty. Gina waved to him from the top balustrade. Roy waved back. Could his friends, the Bai family, take him in? He had become homeless. Gina thought he was such a cheeky guy. She was furious. What kind of idea was he? Grandpa is worth over 10 million. Where is this? And he still dares to ask for a place to stay. Roy laughed. He's not much interested in cars. He prefers cash. This was too much. Gina was really angry. She waved her fists at him and told him to stay put. She quickly went down and attacked the guy. Roy was at first confused by her aggressive onslaught. But then he came to his senses and put his hand forward, trying to stop the girl. He, after all, saved her grandfather, and the whole family at the same time. Is this really how you should thank someone for kindness? Gina was still seething, but she stopped and didn't get into a fight. She angrily asked why the guy had come back. He repeated that he had nowhere to live. Gina snorted. But he's the Thorne heir. How come he has nowhere to live? Roy explained that although his last name was Thorne, he was not part of the famous family she thought of. Gina had already calmed down completely. She even felt sorry for the guy, and she called him to follow her. Roy pecked delicately and pointed his finger down at her, hinting at something. The girl lowered her head, saw that she was wearing house slippers, and blushed. But the next moment she again rushed at the guy with her fists, calling him a pervert. Roy jumped out through the open gates, not waiting for her revenge. In the evening, Roy sat on the comfortable sofa with his feet up on the table in his assigned room in the Bai family home. Opposite him, Bethany Lowe sat with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl, sternly asking whether Roy was a Thorne or not. Roy got tired of this interrogation. He told the girl that she was asking too many questions. And anyway, it's already late. Isn't it time to go and rest? Bethany stood up. She didn't mean any harm. She just needed to make sure he wasn't an enemy. And how could she tell if he was a threat or not? She had to ask questions. Roy thought about it. There was something in the girl's words. Good. Let Bethany answer a few questions then. She looked at him in surprise but did not object. What interests him? Roy remembered some incidents and asked, what kind of place is this? Why are there satanic mosquitoes and creatures from the dark star here? Bethany explained that this world is shaky and unstable with space-time rifts. But why does Roy ask this? Does that mean he really isn't from here, but from another world? The guy appeared to her in his devilish essence. Yes, he is the majestic king of hell. Richard Maine returned to his blast-damaged home with concrete blocks and structural parts strewn everywhere. He walked into the room that had once served as his office. As expected, the safe was there, safe and sound. Of course, made of a special alloy, it cost a lot of money. Richard opened it and muttered that it didn't matter much whether Roy Thorne found it or not. He would beg for mercy in his death throes anyway. In his hands was a sealed glass containing something emitting a dim light. A voice came from behind him. Did Richard Maine still have things like that? Richard cringed, caught red-handed. A female figure loomed in the doorway. The girl leaned her shoulder casually on the yard and sneered. It was very brave of him to come here himself. Richard turned angrily towards her and threw the glass at her with all his might. That damned Roy Thorne must finally die. The girl easily grabbed the jar with one hand. It seems that Richard does not fully understand reality. Satanic mosquitoes must be watched out for. With that, she turned to leave. But Richard was unrestrained in his madness. He was not going to let her go alive. Since she had come, he would make her die a painful death. Her eyes flashed with excitement. Now try to stop her. Richard muttered that there was no way to know without trying, and rushed forward, trying to grab her. The girl flew up, pushing off with her foot lightly and gracefully. Hanging from the ceiling, she teased. Sure, the Lennon family is strong enough, but it's a shame they got a bastard like Richard. The guy gritted his teeth. Now he'll catch her. She'll answer for every word. The girl jumped to the floor like a wild cat. Was he not satisfied with the title of young master? Why get into things that your head doesn't fit into? In a mad leap, Richard shouted that the Alliance would reward him for her leadership. He threw a bolt of energy at the girl. She twisted easily, jumping up and throwing her clot, attacking Richard. His neck was shrouded in a thick fog, which mercilessly tightened its embrace. The girl laughed. That's why he was Maine, not Lennon. Richard continued to struggle in a futile attempt to free himself from the fog, but managed to hiss at her to close the hole. Then he threw his fist at her, launching a charge. The winning girl recoiled from the explosion. She feigned surprise and said that she almost forgot. After all, the Maine family members are close in strength to D-rank masters. But what does he know about her talents? The fog was receding. Richard caught his breath. The girl stood in front of him. The game is over for today. She won't kill him today. I really want to, but unfortunately it's not possible yet. Richard brazenly offered to continue the fight. Yes, he was not capable of killing her, but surely someone could do it for him. Suddenly, the ceiling became covered with a web of cracks. A rain of fire began to pour through them. The girl quickly got her bearings and covered her head with a book. So this was an ace up her sleeve? Curious. Who helped Richard? He replied smugly that he was not so stupid as to come here himself. Did Olivia really think so badly of him? The girl flew into the air. She didn't care about Richard at all. She got what she came for, and now she's running away from here. The guy realized something and rushed after him, but it was too late. Olivia was gone. Only the vibrations in the air reminded her that she had just flashed by here. Richard shouted after her that next time he would tear her to shreds. In the Bai family's estate, Roy held the energy scythe in his hands. He was finally able to summon his old comrade. Roy was in good shape now. It was time to start looking for information. What was going on here was nonsense. It needed to be sorted out. Somewhere outside, a guy asked if Roy Thorne was there. The scythe disappeared into thin air. Roy went out onto the balcony and looked up. There, hanging like a bat, was a pretty black-haired girl. Who was this? What did she want? She fell to her feet and jumped off the balcony railing towards Roy. She said hello. She said she just wanted to look at him. Roy interrupted impatiently. No need for long introductions. We can get straight to the point. Olivia, and it was she, pouted primly. Why such a rush? Suddenly, she knocked over Roy's glass, which she had stolen from Maine. It was a gift from her. Roy barely managed to catch it. There was something inside. The guy looked closely. He knew this thing well. Roy grabbed his phone and dialed Stanley Baker. He told him to do the job and not to come back until he did it right. The guy and Olivia were standing on the balcony of his room in the Bai estate. He looked at the glass the girl gave him with surprise. I wonder where she got it. Olivia winked mysteriously. Where? Straight from the hands of young Master Maine. Would such a gift suit the ruler of all hell? Roy jerked in surprise and turned sharply to the girl. Who was she anyway? She recoiled and pressed herself against the wall. Olivia Jones couldn't say that yet. It wasn't time. With that, she jumped lightly into the air and waved goodbye. Roy managed to grab her leg. He dragged the girl back. Well, no, this won't work. He didn't allow her to leave yet. Olivia was a little stunned but not scared. She hung in the air and shook her head reproachfully. How could he be so impatient? He would find out everything in due time. At least she was not his enemy. That she is not an enemy, Roy understood. But curiosity is a terrible thing. So he is curious about who she is. Olivia laughed heartily. She is looking forward to her next meeting with impatient Roy. She jerked to the side, and the young man let her go. He stood there, wondering why the secrecy. Why not just say who she was and what she wanted? But there were no answers to these questions yet. Nothing. He would wait. Roy took the glass. Satanic mosquitoes and the heart of the Asura. This system could maintain the energy of the heart that supplied blood to the mosquitoes. For some reason, this thing seemed familiar, but the young man could not remember everything. Suddenly, his phone came to life. Lily's name appeared on the screen. After some time, a silver swallow flew through the night city. Roy decided it was time to settle the score with Richard Maine. The guy was driving, and Stanley Baker was sitting next to him. He was holding a glass with a heart in it. What was that thing? Roy swore foully. Stan stared at his boss in shock. Really? Really? This is... Roy angrily muttered through his teeth. which finally made the guy's brains fall into place and start working. Stan took a moment to try to make sense of everything that had just been revealed to him. Then he asked Roy why he was here. He called him the ruler. Roy replied that he himself would like to know, but he does not understand yet. But he knows for sure that besides Stanley there are a bunch of satanic mosquitoes here. How did all this end up here? Let the young man tell everything he knows. Stan's gaze froze. He sank into memories. But there were few of them. He remembered the explosion on the planet, and then he came to his senses here, and all of that. Roy asked in amazement about the explosion. There was an explosion on the demon star. Stan nodded affirmatively. He remembered the huge sphere growing and expanding, and then he lost consciousness. Richard Roy found him in his office. How did he get this mane? How many times do I have to kick his ass until he finally calms down? Richard sat next to the tied-up Lily Lan. A gag was sticking out of the girl's mouth. He looked at Roy with a predatory expression. It all started because of this woman. But now it will all end. God, what kind of nonsense is he talking about? Roy's face twisted. Why doesn't Richard ask Stephen Thorne how it all really happened? Richard didn't care about the Thorne family squabbles. He knew one thing. The one who dared to touch the bride must die. Roy didn't mind, but he wanted to know where Richard got the Asur mask first. Could he tell me? Rage overwhelmed Maine. He jumped up and rushed at the guy. Of course he would fight back, but only after he sent the insolent Roy Thorne to hell. The boy couldn't help but laugh. What irony. Hell was his home. He put up a defense. Richard, attacking, flew into the energy wall that Roy had put up. He was thrown back. Roy was openly mocking. Would Richard like to go to hell with him? He was shaking with anger. Now he would give this smug turkey some heat. Richard strained with all his strength. Roy watched his opponent carefully. Maine put everything he had into the attack, screaming, "Die!" and unleashing a stream of fiery energy at the boy. On his hand was a knuckle duster with long metal barbs. The energy also flew away in long, prickly rays. Roy was surrounded by clouds of his protective aura. Therefore, he was not afraid of any tricks of the Maine family. The thorns of Maine energy were shattered into pieces. Now it was Roy's turn to attack, but an incomprehensible noise distracted him. He glanced at her for a moment. Lily was actively trying to warn him, and behind her stood a man with his hands behind his back. While Roy was rethinking the situation, Richard, wasting no time, went on the offensive. Red alarms flashed towards the guy. I was tired of this circus. It was time to end it. Roy quickly outlined something on the floor, easily fought it off, and retreated. Richard found himself in the center of the pentagram. He looked around with fear, and Roy mockingly said that if Maine liked this place so much, he should remember everyone who had calmed down here. Let him now have some fun with his former servants. A wall of ghostly girls moved towards Richard, appearing literally out of nowhere. It was a terrible sight. The ghosts rushed to attack. Roy didn't waste time watching the massacre. The guy with his hands behind his back was unnerving, but he decided to focus on Lily first, who was always getting into trouble. Chester Lee glanced in his direction, but continued to stand where he was. Lily finally managed to free herself from the gag and let out a shrill scream for Roy to be careful as Chester shadowed past. But the guy managed to react, pushing the attacker away. Is he so self-confident that he decided to stop Roy? Chester flew at the guy like lightning and knocked him to the ground. Nothing personal, but the girl has to stay here. Roy intercepted the attacker and pulled him towards himself. Wow, how serious. Are all of them in their alliance like that? The opponents rose to their feet and faced each other. Chester paid a compliment. Roy's abilities far exceeded his expectations. At this time, Richard was spinning madly, barely managing to fight off the ghosts. Having barely thrown the last of them away from him, he shouted for Chester to finish off the guy. He calmly replied that it would be better to wait for that D-rank master. But Richard was already running towards them. What to wait for? We must act. Together they would cope perfectly well, even without the master. With a cry of "Forward!" he jumped. Next to him, the hand of a giant baby with a voracious mouth and toothy eyes shot into the air. It grabbed Richard by the leg like a toy doll, and he thrashed and flailed. "Damn doll! Not to him now! Snipe, creature!" Richard blew the little shimmering beads from his palm. The child did not like this attitude. He opened his mouth and screamed loudly. A moment later, they exploded simultaneously. The monster's head flew away, and its entire body was pierced from the inside by thorns. The baby dropped Richard, who barely managed to brace himself to avoid being hurt in the fall. The freak fell back and only twitched his arms and legs. Richard asked Roy what else he could do. "Come on, let him show his tricks." Nearby, a baby, crying tears of blood, breathed his last. And then it vanished into thin air, leaving behind only clouds of smoke. Richard and Chester were left alone in the middle of the room. They looked around for Roy and Lily, but there was no trace of them. The sofa where the girl had just been sitting was empty. Roy, holding the girl under his arm, flew down quickly. He simply went out the window. Lily screamed. Roy reproached her for being too much of a problem woman. She called on the phone once and had to be pulled out of such a mess right away. She said she didn't really want to see him again. Roy reminded her of the situation she was in. The girl, having come to, apologized and thanked him. They were still at a respectable height. Finally, Roy landed on the roof of a low building. He put Lily down. She was safe here, and he still had to deal with these guys. The girl tried to object, but Roy had already pushed off the roof and flashed upward. She stood there alone, watching him soar higher and higher. This guy had saved her once again. Stanley suddenly appeared behind Richard and Chester. He was holding a jar with an Asura heart in his hands. They know what that is, right? Richard instantly flushed. Where did he get it? Chester quietly clarified. Is that what he thinks? Richard grimaced affably. He would explain it all to the elders of the North Atlantic Alliance later. For now, the main task was to get this thing back. Stanley wondered where these guys got it from. He uncorked the lid and took the heart in his hand. It was pulsating and shimmering with a dull greenish light. Stan Lasso licked his lips. Satanic mosquitoes are a real delicacy. His opponents rushed towards him, horrified at what he was about to do. However, they didn't have time. Stan had already swallowed the heart. He broke into a sated grin. It had been a long time since he had enjoyed such a treat. But it wasn't quite Stan anymore. He had turned into a creature with white hair and green eyes. His clothes were rags. He wanted to play with the boys until his owner returned. The creature laughed loudly, throwing its head back. The rags shattered into pieces with a crackling sound, exposing the creature's powerful muscular chest. Greenish energy gushed forth, curling into bizarre patterns. It continued to laugh, clenching its strong fists and demonstrating excellent physical fitness. The creature was holding. She winked excitedly, anticipating the battle. Stan could not even hope that such an incredible artifact could be found in this world. Who is ready to engage him first? Richard flared up instantly. Did this monster really think that he, Richard Maine, was afraid of him? Without thinking, he rushed forward. Chester had always been reserved and did not approve of Richard's inflammatory actions. He wanted to stop the guy. But the creature had already knocked him down on the floor and was beating him with all its might, while simultaneously squeezing his throat. He couldn't even move. All he could do was call for help. Chester grabbed the first thing he could get his hands on and swung at the monster. Stan sensed danger. He came back. He looked at Chester frozen for a minute. Richard took advantage of the moment and, freeing his hand, he slashed it right into the creature's face. And then he pounced himself. Chester attacked from behind. A loud alarm threw Chester back. What is this? Richard flew in the other direction. Stan stood between them and bared his teeth until they were corners. He had prepared a present for the boys. At that moment, Chester rushed forward, intending to finish off the enemy. But, running through the void where the creature had just been, he ran straight into Richard, who was about to attack with an energy charge. The boys fell. The creature was nowhere to be found. Chester was holding his wounded arm. It was the one that had taken the brunt of the energy. It was unlikely that it would be saved now. Richard cursed. It was a poison charge. Without wasting any time, he warned Chester to hold on tight and be careful. With one sharp movement, he cut off the arm at the elbow. Chester rocked his stump and, almost in tears, swore that he would definitely get that bastard and kill him. Richard agreed that Roy was Chester's business, and he held out a mother-of-pearl tablet to him in his palm. As soon as Chester swallowed it, a new arm appeared in place of the stump. It was not an ordinary one, but muscular and strong. None of them noticed Stanley behind them, but he watched them and realized that Richard Maine had a talent for controlling rare metal. Chester finally saw the enemy and ran towards it, waving his new arm. It seemed as if the arm was controlling him, pulling him forward. He was going to kill the monster. But suddenly there was an explosion. Roy hung in the air in front of Richard, his arms crossed over his chest. Yes. It turns out that Mr. Maine does not disdain dirty methods. Has no one heard of family honor? Richard snapped that Roy himself was a fool. For example, he wanted with all his heart to represent the Lennon family, but he was not allowed to, and Roy had given up on the family. At the same time, he slowly scattered fire beads around himself. They lengthened and spikes formed on both sides. Richard continued. Blood ties are sacred. Roy had appeared uninvited in Richard's city and had become a hated enemy. So now he must die. Richard threw both hands forward. The thorny spines flew at Roy, but they encountered the defense and did not reach their target. Richard was hostile from the start. Is he related to Roy's family? He said out loud that you can't rely only on your family's prestige. And that's what Richard does. He simply uses the family's authority to pursue his own goals. Roy smiled. The one who had risen to the position of demon emperor in his world was now worried about trivialities like family. Roy's black energy spread throughout the room. She gradually approached Richard. When she was very close, he threw forward a strong, powerful fist. The arm lengthened and reached out towards Roy. But I came across the guy's gaze, and, as if on a silent command, she turned around and stretched back. Roy already had his scythe. He put the blade to Richard's throat. Richard continued. Roy Thorne is nothing. If it weren't for the Bai family, he would be a complete zero. Roy pressed harder on the blade. The first trickles of blood began to drip onto Richard's shirt collar. It became really scary. Roy Thorne wouldn't dare kill him. A wry smile crossed Roy's face. Why is that? Who can stop him or forbid him? Richard groaned that the Alliance would never forgive him for this murder, and the Lennon family even less. The last 2 fire beads fell from Richard's palm. Roy got worked up. Does Richard really think he's never been threatened? Of course he has. He's the Emperor of Demons. In his past life, he was the Emperor of Demons. And now he is Roy Thorne. But in this life, he intends to become better and stronger. His domain is hell. And he swept the scythe. Richard Maine's chair rolled down. Chester screamed loudly behind him. Well, that's it. Looks like Roy Thorne is in trouble. Richard Maine's headless body lay in the middle of the room. Chester was stunned. He couldn't believe this was happening. Behind him, Stan was gloating. The master was dead, and Chester hadn't shed a tear. The swarm has returned to them. This must finally be put to an end. If the Alliance wants to confront him, they will go to the end. Chester muttered that Mrs. Lennon would be furious. She would declare war, and she would be different. Not even the fact that he belonged to the Thorne family would stop her. Roy listened to him silently. A strange fog began to swirl behind the guy. It thickened, became denser, and finally a man in a strange black and green hat appeared from it. He told Chester Lee to leave. He quickly headed towards the exit, and Stan stopped him. The alien rushed to help. However, Roy allowed Chester to be released. The man in the hat looked at them warily. Stan objected to Roy. If Chester told about Maine's death, it would not do the master any good. The guy replied that he didn't care about these people from a tiny planet. He wants to regain his former glory and power, to be on top of the universe. What do the people there matter to him? Stanley was on his knee. The owner will definitely succeed. Roy moved forward and called Stan to follow him. Let him cover his back. He has a C-rank strength according to human classification. He meekly replied that he obeyed. Roy ordered to monitor the situation. The opulent mansion was impressive in its grand scale. There were several modern buildings, open terraces, and a swimming pool with tables around the perimeter. There were many cars parked near it. People were milling about inside, huddled together and chatting. At the far end of the room stood Chester Lee and a man in a hat. Chester addressed him as Mr. Freeman. What did he think the Lennon family would do this time? Freeman responded that the Lennons hadn't broken ties with the Thornes only because the latter were supported by the Bai family. And as long as there was a problem with Demon Gate, there was nothing they could do. The men watched the guests for a while. Freeman was surprised to see that there were many non-alliance people at the banquet this time. A blonde lady in a stylish wine-colored outfit entered the room. Whispers were heard. Why was the Lennon family here? It seemed that someone had killed someone who belonged to their family. The lady ignored the gossip. She walked confidently to the center of the room. It was Audrey Lennon, Richard Maine's mother. She congratulated everyone at the Alliance banquet and thanked them for their work. She had previously been too preoccupied with the situation with the Demon Gate, but now she had to report on behalf of the Alliance elders. Chester quietly asked Freeman what was going on. He didn't understand. But if we were talking about elders, then it had to be something serious. The woman continued. She explained that the North Atlantic Alliance had made a temporary truce with the Demon Gate, so everyone could rest for a while. But she raised her hand, holding her son's head. The Lennon family wants to get even with the one who challenged them, Whoever helps do this will be rewarded by the elders. The crowd began to discuss. Some asked about the reward and praised the generosity of the North Atlantic Alliance. There were also those who whispered condemningly about the cruelty. After all, the woman had brought the head of her son. Audrey heard none of this. She was lost in her own thoughts. Roy Thorne didn't have long to live. At the same time, Roy, on the other side of town, choked on his drink. He snorted and cleared his throat. Who was remembering him like that? Andrew laughed. Who? Probably another beauty. Roy snapped at him so he wouldn't beg for nonsense. What beauties? Has his friend forgotten what a mess he's in now? And anyway, is Puklik going to continue following him? Andrew answered without hesitation that no matter who Roy was, be it the Demon Emperor or an ordinary student, he was still his friend. Therefore, they should stick together. Roy moved towards the exit. He replied, slightly mockingly, that Andrew, with his size, would hardly follow him. Chubby was offended. Why did he do this? He was reborn in this world and wants to restore everything that was lost. There is a difficult path ahead. Will a friend's help really be superfluous? Roy's demeanor waned. He really shouldn't have been so sarcastic. He said in a conciliatory tone that he was entrusting Andrew with an important mission. Resource management. Suddenly, Stan appeared at the door. The Bai family wants to see the owner. It seems important. Roy shrugged. It looked like someone from the Lennon family had shown up. The guy arrived to where the construction was going on. Bethany Lowe met him. She dug her heels in and started to complain. She was here day and night supervising the construction of his house, and he didn't even say hello. Roy didn't stay in debt. Did he ask for it? It was their organization's initiative. They wanted to please him. Will Bethany appeal this decision now? The girl exploded. He was simply impossible. It was impossible to communicate with him. She threw a key at him and got ready to leave, citing being busy. Roy thoughtfully twirled the key in front of his eyes. Suddenly, he asked what their organization did. Bethany softened. They study everything that helps people become stronger. But the most important thing is the sources of strength, its origins. For them, this is the most important thing. Therefore, the one who helps them to discover secrets and shed light on some questions can become a friend and a brother. Roy suddenly became angry. So, a brother? And what is this then? He threw out his hand, shooting a charge of energy towards the nearest bushes. A man fell out of there, spitting out blood. They assigned him a spectator? Bethany clapped her hands in confusion. Roy, having calmed down a bit, ordered her not to do that again, especially if she was going to ask him for something. Don't forget that he is not just anyone, but the Emperor of Demons. There was a meeting at the Bai family estate. The old man asked Bethany why there was a split in the organization. He heard that some people had rebelled against Roy Thorne. The girl confirmed that this was true. It was not surprising. There were always many groups within the organization whose views often diverged. But this would not prevent Miss Bai from joining them. Gina jumped up in surprise. Her face fell in surprise. Was she really going to be allowed to join them? Bethany explained that NatureMed was the most prestigious research organization in the world. It wasn't easy to get in. But Roy Thorne had earned them the right. Gina frowned instead of being happy. Every time this guy was mentioned, she got angry. Bethany nodded in agreement. Suddenly, Gina was taken aback. What is this? Bethany continued to speak, but her face distorted. Her mouth and chin lengthened. Or did she imagine it? Bethany said that once Gina was accepted into the organization, she would receive her first task. The girl fidgeted impatiently. What would it be? The answer stunned her. She would have to look after Roy Thorne instead of Bethany. Gina protested indignantly. Why him? Why would she need a freak? Roy lay on a large bed in a new house. What was going on Demon Star now? They had been sending slaves to this planet all along. Now he's here trying to settle in, forced to start all over again. There might be more from Demon Star here. We need to find them. A sudden rustling noise made Roy jump out of bed. Stan Baker was sitting behind the door. Why was he there? The guy replied that he hadn't dared disturb the owner because he seemed too upset. Roy asked him why he didn't hold a grudge against him. After all, back home, Stan had lost a rank-up fight to him, and that was very important to him. Stan answered honestly that at first he was angry and hated. But then Roy managed to become an emperor. That was something to be respected. Stan himself was not capable of that. Later, he realized that the place of the emperor was originally supposed to belong to Roy. Everything happened as it was supposed to happen. Then, Roy changed the order on the demon star, freeing the population from the humiliating laws that reigned there under the three masters. The entire planet's population considered him a hero, and Stan sincerely admired him. How could he hate him? He was ready to follow Roy through fire and water. Roy missed his planet. He would find out what had happened there, but not now. There was an urgent problem to solve. This is the Lennon family. They are after him, so he can't sit back. Stan listened to Roy with his mouth open. What is he going to do? The guy replied that the best defense is an attack. We need to seize the initiative. He will visit the guys from the Alliance tonight. The building Roy drove up to seemed empty at first glance. He stopped at the main entrance. Bethany's words suddenly came to mind. There's always a factional war going on in their organization. Those who are against Roy are not their people. They don't want to be at odds with him, and they don't wish him any harm. Roy got this information in exchange for forgiveness and favor after he discovered the spy. Bethany also told him where one of the Alliance's secret headquarters was. As soon as the guy got out of the car, a man rushed towards him. He earnestly offered to help. Roy was about to throw him the car keys, but the man intercepted it from his palms. Clutching the key in his fist, he called the guy by name and said sternly that no one had invited him here. Roy asked him again what he meant. There were already 2 guards. One of them explained that Roy shouldn't have come here. It was still the middle of the night. Something irreparable could happen, and he wouldn't come home. Roy barked that he was here on business, and their job is to open and close the door. Let the boys do their job. A guest came to them, ready to pay money. One of the guards politely said that their doors are always open for dear guests. At the same time, his gaze was zombie-like. Roy casually motioned for him to park his car and walked past him towards the entrance. He said through his teeth that everything would be done. But the next moment, he scooped Roy up into a huge stream and leaned towards his ear. Whatever the guy thinks about it, let him understand that once he enters inside, there will be no turning back. Roy answered carelessly so that he wouldn't worry. He would be back soon. Behind the closed door of one of the offices, a young man was waving his arms emotionally. Roy Thorne had come to them himself. This was simply incredible luck. You can't miss such a chance. The dark-haired beauty thought they were not risking anything. Everyone knew that little Mane was some kind of fighter. Anyone could handle him. If no one objected, he would start first. The gray-haired, mustachioed man gave her carte blanche. Let the beauty do what she thinks is right. There was a knock at the door. One of the young men present in the office stared in surprise. Who could it be? Everyone knows they're having a meeting. He was about to open it when someone shouted at him not to do it. But it didn't matter. The door was blown off its hinges by a powerful blow. The young man was covered with them. Roy Thorne stood on top of the structure, smiling. Had he interrupted the meeting? Had they figured out how to deal with him yet? The young man strained, trying to crawl out from under the door. Roy noticed him and mockingly asked what the guy was doing there. Was it some kind of interesting hobby? He replied furiously that he would show him a hobby now. Roy shook his head. Some kind of bad energy is felt from below. Just hostility. Let it go. A small explosion destroyed the door, along with the impudent young man. Roy turned to the others. Would they like him to talk about his weak points? The beauty nodded vigorously. The guy laughed. What a pretty woman. But he doesn't like the other man. Does he want to die here, or does he prefer to go with him? The same guard he had hypnotized appeared behind Roy. The little one screamed. What's going on here anyway? The guy didn't pay any attention to her. He leaned on the guard as if he were a wall. Pointing his finger at the mustachioed man, Roy asked if he was the boss. Instead of answering, the husband also asked what the guy did with the security guard. Roy suggested that he find out by becoming a demon soldier himself. The guy looked into the eyes of the mustachioed man and the rabbit in turn. They instantly turned into obedient dolls. The guy, accompanied by a bodyguard, retreated into the corridor. The hypnotized stood with their heads down. Roy paused in the doorway for a moment and announced that this place now belonged to Roy Thorne, and any Alliance members who appeared here were to be destroyed. His newly converted demonic soldiers dropped to their knees and obediently agreed to the order. Roy called Andrew on the phone. Now the Red Diamond nightclub is also in Chubby's area of responsibility, and no need for unnecessary questions. Roy ran into Bethany Lowe in the hallway. He said he didn't think his request would be a problem for her. She sternly answered the guy not to go too far. The organization is not all-powerful. Roy went into dumb mode. Really? He thought they were trying to get along with him, but if not, How could he trust them? Were they planning an assassination attempt on him? Bethany waved her hands. "Stop talking nonsense. She will help, but this is the last time." The guy asked her what she was doing there anyway. The girl explained that she had received an order to transfer her from NatureMed. Now her place would be taken by Gina Bai. Roy should address all questions to her. The guy leaned toward Bethany, as if he was going to kiss her. She froze. He held her chin and said that he didn't need anyone. He didn't like to bother people at all. Gina instantly appeared behind Bethany, grabbed her by the shoulders and screamed at Roy that he was behaving simply disgustingly. What he was doing was at the very least indecent. The guy looked at Gina mockingly, as if he had just noticed. "Oh, and she was here?" Bethany interrupted their argument. "Let them both calm down. We need to finish things quickly." Roy sat down and prepared to listen. Bethany told him not to bother Gina anymore because she was new. Everything Bethany knew she had already told him. The young man replied that he would not create any problems for the girl. On the contrary, he could take care of her. For some reason, Bethany had a feeling that nothing good was going to happen. She had a bad feeling. But she continued. "The organization has a secret status, but it is huge. They can't even imagine it. Bethany operates several branches, but it is only a small part of the overall share. The organization has its people everywhere. They are in the highest echelons of power. They also have a lot of materials for scientific research. Conflicts constantly flare up within the organization. None of its members neglects any methods to achieve the goal." Roy listened, puzzled. The scale of it was astounding, and the Demon Gates weren't their people. But surely Bethany could have arranged a meeting with the organization's leadership for him. The girl was furious. What impudence! Wasn't he asking too much? Roy promised to disappear from her life as soon as he finished his business. Finally, Bethany gave in. She picked up the phone and made a call. Apologizing for the late call, the girl asked Olivia Jones to come to the Red Diamond nightclub. This came as a complete surprise to Roy. What part did Olivia play in this? A security guard walked along a long row of containers. He walked slowly, dedicating his lanterns to them, and did not expect any surprises. Suddenly, he felt rather than heard that there was someone nearby. However, he did not have time to do anything. A sudden blow knocked him out. The athletic young man smiled contentedly. "Excellent work. A surprise attack always works best." This served as a signal for a group of guys peering out from behind the containers above. Their leader commanded them to move forward. The guys poured down, knocking down and neutralizing other guards. The young man who had killed the first guard and the blonde leader of the fighters, whose name was Mel, watched the fight. Mel expressed hope that after tonight, the Demon Gate would disappear, and their next target would be Roy Thorne. On the open terrace were Gina, Roy, and Olivia. The latter asked why the Lord wanted to see her. Roy, despite her side, explained that he hates riddles and secrets. Therefore, he wants Olivia to tell her plans for the Demon Gate. Gina interrupted the guy indignantly. If Olivia doesn't want to talk, why is he forcing her? Roy, ignoring Gina, continued to press. He needed to know if Olivia had anything to do with the Demon Gate that he himself had once installed. The girl was silent for a long time. Then she raised her head to the sky. A crescent moon hung right above her. It seemed that she could touch it by stretching out her hand. She said thoughtfully that the master liked to keep everything under control. Roy thought about the demon star with pain in his voice. Who knows, if he hadn't done that then, maybe more people would have survived. Olivia finally spoke. Roy had given them permission to hide their identities, but now he could tell. The girl fell to one knee and bowed her head before Roy. The Demon Gate is the Imperial Army, and they are here to serve the ruler. Roy's face stretched in amazement. And who is Olivia then? Her eyes sparkled with amusement. Demonic Imperial Army Guardian Olivia Jones at his service. And Roy remembered her. He had already met the girl in his past life. Gina listened to them with her mouth open. She thought they were discussing something like cosplay. Olivia's cell phone vibrated. She barked that she was listening attentively. A man in combat boots and a theatrical mask sat on a rock with a knife in his hand. He was waiting for information. It was Leo Chase. He represented the North Atlantic Alliance Orlan Force. The night seemed cheerful. Finally, a guy ran up to him and said that they could not find the head of the Demon Gate. The man pulled back his mask. It seemed that the North Atlantic Alliance was determined to destroy the Demon Gate this time. After all, they had recruited more than one criminal group to the operation. Leo laughed happily. He definitely liked this. The guys from the Spectre clan reported that they turned everything upside down, but those two were not found. Leo chuckled. Actually, he should be happy. If those two were here, there wouldn't be a wet spot left of these five. One of the fighters chipped in. Does he doubt their professionalism? Maybe he'll try to fight them? Leo was fooling around. Oh, how scary. He was just shaking with terror. Why are they frozen? Let them attack. Suddenly, a whirlwind flashed between Leo and the fighters. From there, a voice was heard asking Leo not to get excited. The whirlwind turned several times and then froze. A guy with long golden hair emerged from it. He said that they were all on the same side now. They needed to stick together and not fight, and he ordered Leo to hide the knife. One of the fighters congratulated Mr. Harry Webster. Leo said ironically that since Mr. Heavenly Sorrow himself stood up for Harry, then this could be considered his second birthday. The one called Lord Heavenly Sorrow moved to deal with the impudent fellow, but his brothers held him back. Harry, with a melancholy expression on his face, ordered Leo to calm down. Otherwise, he would deal with him personally. He moved his mask to the side and revealed his face, raising his hands up in a conciliatory gesture. Then he asked why Harry had come. He replied that one of the Alliance factions had stumbled upon Olivia Jones. This time, she needed to be dealt with completely. The fighters perked up. They were ready for business and assured Harry that he could count on them. Excellent. Harry sent them off to do their tasks, and he and Leo went to look for the so-called two demons. The traffic in the city was very heavy. The car Roy was driving was barely moving. The guy asked Olivia, who was sitting next to him, if she had calculated the route correctly. There was a traffic jam ahead, and it was unknown how they would go on. The girl assured that this was the shortest route, at least that's what the navigator said. She was also worried about the delay. Roy whistled excitedly and urged everyone to hold on tight. Now he was going to show a master class in fast driving. The car jerked. Gina screamed from the back seat. What was he thinking? Roy stopped abruptly, backed up a little, and pulled out onto the divided lane of the road. There were no problems with progress here, and the car picked up good speed. Olivia clapped her hands in delight. Here was the Demon Emperor in action, always finding the perfect solution. Gina's voice came from behind her, weak. She was exhausted by the recent events. Were they really from another world? Roy glanced over his shoulder at her. Why was it so hard to believe that he was the reincarnation of the Demon Emperor? She had also become part of a rather strange organization. Suddenly, footsteps were heard on the roof of the car. Olivia listened. Who was there? A long-legged girl in a red evening dress and high-heeled shoes actually landed on the roof. Olivia assured that she would sort everything out. Roy warned her to be careful. The girl had already shouted from above that he shouldn't worry. Everything would be fine. Then she looked up and saw who was in front of her. The unexpected guest stretched out to her full height, as if she were not on the roof of a car, but on a podium. Olivia smiled, recognizing the prophet. What a meeting. But she sarcastically asked why her friend wasn't happy to see her. Olivia screamed at her to get away and swung her arm to punch. The guest arched her back incredibly to avoid the unwanted impact of the fist. The girl threw her long, slender leg up and nearly knocked Olivia off the roof. She held on, but the sharp leg ripped her blouse open on her chest. A skirmish ensued. The girls exchanged professional blows. One of Olivia's attacks evened the score. Now the uninvited guest also showed off her bare chest. She bowed and advised Olivia to be careful, because the next attack could strip her naked. Not far away, fighters from the Spectre group watched the duel. The spectacle was truly captivating. The car was racing down the street at high speed. Suddenly, Roy noticed a trap on the road. He slammed on the brakes. The girls on the roof barely held on and looked around in surprise. The car turned across the road. The Spectre fighters rubbed their hands with glee. The trap had worked. They had gotten some great loot. Roy stepped out of the car, his hands in his pockets, thinking with displeasure that he had gotten another fight instead of a greeting ceremony. The girl, who put on a show on the roof of the car, covering her breasts, said that now the guy will meet his end. Roy's eyes flashed predatorily. Really? Good, let's check it out. Roy and Olivia conferred by the car. The girl explained that the attackers were the main forces of the North Atlantic Alliance. In essence, they were bandit groups, but strong ones. Their capabilities were approximately D rank. Roy smiled. The life energy of strong opponents is excellent food, a real delicacy. So today is the festive dinner, but the girl objected. He had to get Miss Bai to safety. She could handle it here herself. Olivia rushed forward at the bandits, throwing out bolts of energy wildly. Roy glanced sideways at Gina, who was glued to the car window. How much darkness there was with her. He ordered the girl to hide and be careful. She wished him success in battle. The boy joined Olivia. He couldn't leave her alone to face the danger, but she replied that she couldn't let him into the fight. Roy ordered the girl not to interfere. He could handle this himself. She obeyed, thinking that the guy hadn't changed at all. He was still the same demon emperor who fought with the earth and the heavens. However, Olivia could not sit idly by. She called out to the girl in the red dress. If she wanted to fight the Lord, he had to defeat her first. But she replied angrily that Olivia was driving her crazy. Roy stood against the Spectre gang, urging them to act together. There were 5 of them. They rose into the air in unison to surround the boy. Roy waited with his lion. From them, in concentric circles, energy of a deep blue color emanated. One of the bandits, having inhaled it, began to cough and then to vomit. He fell to the ground. Another bandit clapped his hands at the lion in fear. Where did he even come from? The blue mist was approaching him. A moment later, he too was finished. The remaining 3 were advancing on Roy. He was so cheeky. Now they would give him what for. The guy made a wide gesture around the circle. The bandits were literally mowed down. Roy dismissed them as weaklings. They didn't even get to have any fun. Olivia was preparing to attack her rival, but she said with respect that the girl had good abilities, as expected from a member of the Demon Gate. Olivia asked what the gang was hoping to gain by sneaking in. It was quiet after all. Why did they disturb it? The rival was silent. Olivia began to get nervous. If she didn't speak herself, she would have to be forced to speak. The girl glanced towards Roy, who was checking the condition of the overcome attackers, digging them with his foot. Her job is to stop Olivia, because their main target is Roy Thorn. Those 5 are just a flock of sheep who are incapable of progressing. But she will fix everything now. The girl bared her teeth like a madwoman. Her eyes shone fanatically. Olivia could say goodbye to her owner. The Alliance would destroy him anyway. Olivia looked at this fight and was dumbfounded. She rushed to protect the guy. The same one fought off bandits who had risen from the dead and turned into zombies. He shouted that he forbade the girl to come closer. But Olivia couldn't leave him. The Emperor had given them all hope for a better future. How could they betray him? Without the Emperor, nothing would have happened. With this thought, she turned in the air and flew like an arrow in that direction. The huge zombie moved slowly towards Roy, reaching out with its arms, trying to grab him. Olivia darted across from him. "Let the master run!" Roy cursed foully. It turns out that these bastards have learned to use the masks of the Asur. A scythe appeared in the boy's hand. He waved it, driving away the annoying zombies. I looked at how the girl was doing. The strong man attacked her, but Olivia flexibly twisted and did not give in to his deadly embrace. And then she hit him in the chest with an energy wave. "Back off, dude!" He was thrown back a little, and Roy's scythe was waiting for him from behind. It pierced the big guy right through. Roy breathed a sigh of relief. Olivia almost touched him with her charge. The girl rewarded him with a magical smile. "But everything is fine, isn't it?" Roy threw his braid over his shoulder. Didn't she know he was very strong? But Olivia was in no mood for humor. She barely managed to warn Roy about the danger behind him. 2 zombies suddenly landed on top of the boy's back. There was no time to think. The girl, without hesitation, pushed Roy away and rushed at the monster. They bared their teeth, preparing to tear their victim to pieces. Roy screamed at the top of his lungs for Olivia to come back. A powerful explosion interrupted his scream. Roy waved his arms, dispersing the smoke. But suddenly he started coughing. A sword was sticking out of his chest. This girl in the red dress, taking advantage of the smokescreen and sneaking up from behind, pierced him right through. Roy cursed under his breath. "Damn it! It's not very pleasant when you have a hole through you with a weapon sticking out of it." The girl laughed as she rose into the air. "Let Roy Thorn die, but he will regret in his next life that he dared to go against the Alliance." Roy concentrated. She used a demon-slaying technique called Blood Spirit. Red tongues of flame with demons at the ends stretched out from the boy. They quickly caught up with the girl, knocking her to the ground. The girl was reflected madly. They were circling around so fast that it was impossible to follow them. She glared at Roy. Was he trying to trick her? "It won't work!" The girl rushed forward. But something held her back. Looking down, she was surprised to find herself entangled in red fiery ropes. The guy laughed maliciously. "Now there's no way to escape." He pulled out the sword that was sticking out of his chest. He grabbed it tightly and squeezed it so hard that only the fragments fell out. The girl watched in fear. Meanwhile, a dark blue cloud of devilish energy was accumulating around her. She noticed her and wanted to call for help, but the scream was drowned out by the thick fog that swallowed the girl. He embraced her, forming a sphere. Roy ran towards Olivia, who lay half-naked a little further away and did not move. He picked her up in his arms. Her body hung lifelessly. Gina ran out of the car. "What's wrong with Olivia? Is she alive?" The girl was alive, but very weak. It was necessary to find a suitable place to help her. Gina approached the blue ball of fog that had swallowed the girl and asked what would happen to her. Roy explained that her body and soul would dissolve in this Mara, and she herself would become his bloody puppet. She deserved it because she had hurt his man. Ginny was truly scared. What she had just seen convinced her that all the stories were true. This guy really was from hell, and she didn't want to fight with him. Roy took care of Olivia. The soul was stabilized, but the Asur mask contained a curse of self-destruction, and it penetrated the girl's body. It would not be easy to deal with it. Roy ordered Ginny to move away and not interfere, and she tried to ask permission to look. However, the guy did not allow it. Olivia needed vital energy. Roy locked himself in the car, left alone with Olivia. He apologized to the girl in advance, because what he was about to do was necessary. Gina stood alone and looked around. The sight of the misty sphere was mesmerizing. It gradually changed color and became brighter. The girl decided to come closer to get a better look, but her way was blocked by two tall figures. One figure was in a white cloak and had a dark face, and the other was the opposite. It had a light face and a black cloak. They asked if Gina had seen Miss Olivia Jones. The girl screamed in fear that she was in the car. The figures rushed towards the car. Gina realized what she had done and ran after them. But the figures were moving away. She couldn't catch up with them. In desperation, Gina called out loudly for Roy. The girl was surprised to see that the car was rocking and strange groans were coming from there. Gina was angry. Damn freak. At such a moment, he is busy with God knows what. Suddenly, the two figures were blocked by an expensive girl in a red dress. She stood between them in the car, confident and firm. Energy swirled around her in a red spiral. The figures slowed down, and then they grabbed the girl and poured her and her up. Her eyes sparkled and energy poured out. Within a couple of minutes, the figures were wrapped in their own cloaks and immobilized. They were kneeling on the road as a blood-red stream of energy struck near them, breaking through the asphalt. Roy's order to stop this was heard from within the car. The figures froze. Half-naked Roy got out of the car and addressed them. Are they demons of heaven and earth? Gina's mouth dropped open as she realized who she was seeing. These were the ones called the greatest power of the demon gate. The bloody puppet managed to delay them for a bit. However, Roy said that these two are just dolls, although they look quite natural. Olivia appeared, pulling her shirt down over her chest as she walked. She could teach Roy. However, he did not let her finish. He said that he was giving her the puppet. Gina ran up to Roy. She was thrilled that the puppet was very strong. Its skill amazed the girl. And where did Roy send her? Roy didn't answer. He realized that he needed many more apostates. In the courtyard of the Bai family's estate, two men were drinking coffee. The head of the family met with the deputy minister of the Secret Service headquarters, Alexander Williams, a pleasant young man in dark glasses. The old man asked him to look after his granddaughter, Gina Bai. Alex assured that the girl would be fine. The men had already finished their conversation. Alexander was about to leave when the noise of a car attracted their attention. A black car without license plates drove into the yard through the open gate. He braked sharply right in front of the men. A blond, strong young man came out. Without greeting anyone, he asked who Roy Thorne was. Alex recognized the guy. It was Mel Lennon. He greeted him and asked how he was doing. He replied that his business concerned only the Lennon family and Roy Thorne, and his staff had better not interfere in it. The old man could not stand such impudence. Doesn't it seem to Mr. Lennon that he is taking too much liberty? He entered someone else's territory and demands that a person be handed over to him like a thing. Mel freaked out. He was about to throw his fists at the old man. However, Alex saved the situation. The man grabbed his hands and pulled them as far away as possible. They hadn't had anything in common for a long time, but that's no reason to give free rein to their fists, is it? Mel responded sharply that Alex's organization had been taking on too much lately. Alexander was hurt, but he kept his cool. He didn't care about Roy Thorne. And now Mel was at the Bai family estate, and he wouldn't let anyone touch that family. Mel shouted to the old man that he would leave now, but on the condition that Thorne would find him himself and the Bai family would not interfere. The old man was silent for a moment. Alex asked him again what he thought about this. The head of the Bai family solemnly said that he would never agree to such conditions. He owed his life to Roy. Therefore, betraying him would be the same as giving up the honor of the family. Mel digested this information. It was a bold statement. He said he would give them 3 days. If Thorn did not show up in that time, the Bai family would be erased from history forever. With these words, the young man got into the car and drove away. Olivia sat with her chin propped up thoughtfully. A little further away, Roy was leaning against the wall. Everyone was silent. Each of them was thinking about something. Gina broke the silence. What happened to them? Why were they playing at silence? Roy explained the situation. He was sure the Lennons were keeping tabs on the Bai family. He was trying to think of a way to give them some distance. The girl screamed in amazement. So the Lennon family has a grudge against them? Roy had no doubt about it. Lenoni already knew all of Roy's contacts in this city. Since the Thorn family didn't care about the guy, the only people he had close to were the Bai family. The girl became worried. She grabbed the phone first and then decided to go home to warn her grandfather about the danger. Here, Olivia responded joyfully. She had just received information that one of the Lennons had already been to their house. However, Gina's grandfather refused to hand over the demon emperor. Gina clutched her head in despair. What had Grandpa done? Roy thought about it. So we need to come up with some kind of plan. Later, he ordered the girls to return to the Bai estate and protect Lily Lan, Linda, and Andrew Scott, while the guy himself, along with Stan, was going to do something else. Olivia jumped in surprise. What exactly were they going to do? Roy replied that they still needed helpers. A thin crescent moon hung over the building of the old hotel. 2 people were walking quickly along the corridor, Roy and Stan. Both were dressed in strict, expensive suits and looked quite official. They went to the front desk and booked the presidential suite for a week. The receptionist was dejected. They only have 2 presidential numbers, but both are already taken. Roy waved his bank card in the air and expressed hope that they could work this out. The girl politely asked to wait a minute and ran to call the manager. The guys exchanged glances and remained waiting at the counter. But as soon as the girl disappeared from sight, they darted into the elevator and went up to the desired floor. Stan remained on guard in the corridor. A red and black ribbon of energy was stretching from under the door of the room Roy had entered. Stan quietly warned the owner to be careful. This red and black ribbon enveloped Roy almost completely. It was a murderous aura. In the room, on a small sofa, sat a man in a bathrobe. Roy walked quietly behind him. The man felt movement behind him, pulled out his knife, and turned sharply to face the intruder. How did he even get in? The guy grinned ominously. It doesn't matter anymore. The main thing is that now the man will be his bloody puppet. Roy's murderous aura instantly formed bloody shackles around the man's neck. The shackles were pierced with metal spikes along the perimeter. At Roy's command, they began to shrink. The man wheezed. The iron was choking. Then the thorns dug into his neck and tightened until Roy declared that the man was now his. Roy's puppet was in the room of Harry Webster, a blond man who led one of the Alliance factions. The blond man was kneeling in front of him with a wounded arm and asking him what he wanted. The puppet stood silently, staring blankly at one point. Roy, who had just entered, answered him. The guy is here to carry out his tasks. His name is Roy Thorn. He offers to listen to him. Harry has 2 options: take an oath and serve him, or become a bloody puppet. With these words, Roy pointed at the guy with a frozen gaze. Harry replied that the choice was interesting. One option was better than the other. Become a dumb puppet slave and become just a slave in exchange for pardon. But he doesn't like any of these options because he's not going to serve Roy Thorn for the rest of his life. At the same time, he gave himself the command forward. A bright explosion blinded and the room filled with smoke. Harry himself disappeared. While Roy was coughing in the room, he jumped out the window, while the blonde flew through floors one after another, heading downwards. He had to warn Mr. Mel Lennon about the high danger of that damned Roy Thorn. Roy looked out the window through which Harry had just escaped in surprise. The boy's incredible courage commanded respect. The height was not small. However, he would still not be able to escape. Roy ordered the puppet to follow the fugitive. Without thinking, he darted down. He flew after Harry, trying to catch up with him. The blonde asked how he dared to go against the North Atlantic Alliance. Nothing. Now he will pay for it. Taking the pendant from his neck, Harry wrapped its rope around his hands. Finally, the blonde flew into one of the open windows and dropped to the floor. His legs felt firm support. A few seconds later, a puppet guy flew past this window. He noticed the trap, but he could no longer stop. Having hit the tape, he lost his balance in flight. He was spun around in a mad whirlwind, and Harry Webster was already engulfed in Roy's murderous aura. The guy himself stood over the blonde's head and demanded that he take him to the lair where everyone was hiding. Mel Lennon's comfortable yacht rocked at the pier. He himself was sitting in one of the cabins on a comfortable sofa. Harry knelt down in front of him. The blonde began to make excuses, but Mel interrupted. The elders of the North Atlantic Alliance expressed dissatisfaction. Harry was expected to act much more effectively and decisively. Harry screamed with energy lightning. He fell to the floor. Mel kept shaking him. Not only did he not stop Thorn, he allowed him to use their own people against the Alliance. He ran away from Thorn when he was supposed to destroy him. What's more, he had the nerve to show up here. Mel ordered him to get out of here and not come back until he killed Roy Thorn. Harry's eyes lit up with a puppet-like gleam. Streams of red energy enveloped him from head to toe. Noticing these changes, Mel realized that this was Roy's trick. He put his hand forward as if to stop his opponent. Circles of energy came from his hand. The energy exploded with such force that the glass from the windows flew out. All that remained of the blonde was a translucent outline, but they quickly thickened and formed into clear contours until they transformed into the figure of a human being. Mel raised his eyebrows in surprise. To be able to recover from such an attack? Interesting. The creature said that it was Roy Thorn. He was amazed that Mr. Lennon could be so cruel to his subordinates. Mel stopped the creature with his next attack. He also threw his hand forward, sending the creature to bathe. At the same time, he also demolished the wall of the cabin. From the deck of the yacht, Mel peered out into the water. This damn Thorn was unlike any other time traveler he had ever seen. This had to be reported to the higher-ups. Roy stood by the glass wall of the hotel room, looking out at the lights of the night city. This Mel Lennon turned out to be quite a tough nut to crack. He won't be easy to deal with, but that makes it even more interesting. The door opened, letting Stan in. He announced that he had solved all the problems. Could they leave? Roy invited him in and had a drink with him. Why should the good wine of the North Atlantic Alliance go to waste? Surprised, Stan asked again if he had understood the owner correctly. He, pouring a drink, confirmed that the guy had not misheard. Now they will drink, and very soon the fabulous show will begin. At the Red Diamond nightclub, Andrew lined up the staff and, swelling with pride, explained to them that he had been appointed manager. They were now under his command. He began to talk long and boringly about the rules, duties, etc. The staff could barely restrain themselves from openly yawning. Stan was standing nearby. He could hardly stand it either. This drill had been going on for an hour. How come Andrew himself wasn't tired? Suddenly something made Stan tense up. He listened attentively, and then, pushing away Puklik, who had decided to wet his thirsty throat, he resolutely went to the door. Andrew, having choked, began to cough. Stan explained that they had guests. They needed to meet them. Chubby muttered after him that he could have behaved more carefully, but he didn't hear him anymore. He focused on the man frozen in the doorway. It was Mr. Freeman, the man in the black and green hat. What had he come for? Andrew finally noticed him too. The guy stood in a fighting position and belligerently asked who he was and what he wanted. Freeman replied that he was looking for Roy Thorn. Roy was in his house. Sitting on the comfortable sofa, he looked at Freeman. He handed the boy a craft envelope. One of the elders of the association told him to give it to Roy, and Mr. Thorn should also know that there is no unity in the Alliance right now. Roy took the envelope and asked who Mr. Freeman served. He avoided a direct answer. The only thing that needs to be known is not Lennon's family. Roy ended the conversation. He received the letter. So Freeman's mission was accomplished. Now Stanley Baker will show him to the exit. Stan gestured for anyone who could to follow him. At the same time, Linda was sitting in the hospital corridor outside one of the rooms, hugging her knees. Mel Lennon, passing by, ordered her to follow him. He could help. The girl hesitated. However, a doctor appeared from the room. She excitedly informed the girl that the treatment was no longer giving positive results. The patient urgently needed surgery. Shocked by this news, Linda hesitated for a moment, but then she resolutely told the doctor to do whatever was necessary. There would be money. And she ran forward with all her might, trying to catch up with the strange man. She blocked his way and begged him to help her mother. She needed money for the operation, and for that, she would leave with him. The man gave his word to help. Does the girl know who he is? Linda looked at him with wide eyes. She didn't care who he was. The main thing was to save her mother. If he helped, she would owe him her life. The husband smiled mysteriously. That's great, he moved on. Linda stood in the middle of the hospital, confused. She thought that she would never have involved Roy Thorne in her affairs. It was good that she had met a man who had agreed to help her. When Roy was left alone, he sent out a stream of energy with the task of following up on what was possible. It was necessary to find out what he was like and who was behind him. A small fly separated from the general mass of energy and flew away where the owner ordered. Stan, accompanying Freeman to the car, asked if there were many in the Alliance who thought differently. He replied that since the Alliance is a very large organization, it is normal that there are different people in it who think differently. This meeting will also be difficult to hide. Stan agreed with that opinion. NatureMed had installed surveillance cameras everywhere here. Already sitting in the car, Freeman called someone on the phone and reported that he did everything as ordered. Roy Thorne really was worth the effort they were expending. He's been in the Alliance long enough to recognize those with extraordinary abilities. Roy Thorne is unique. He has no equal. But Mr. Mel Lennon's plans must be kept secret, for if anyone finds out about them... And finally, Freeman said that Mel Lennon must die by Roy's hand. He's rarely wrong about things like this. There was a spy in the car the whole time. Stan returned to the house. He couldn't understand one thing. In order to return to the Demon Star, the power of these people was needed. But could they be trusted? Roy waved his hand dismissively. Why bother with something stupid? Time will tell. But if interests coincide, then sometimes even hostile parties can unite to achieve a goal. And NatureMed wants to use them as test subjects and gain their knowledge. We need to use this. Stan got it. In any organization, there are people you can collaborate with. Roy agreed. That's right. Stan got it right. Roy tried to call Linda. He received information that Mel Lennon was going to kidnap a girl and blackmail her. The subscriber was out of network coverage. Roy didn't like it. He told Stan to find her and protect her, and don't even think about coming back with bad news. Stanley saluted playfully and went off to do his assignments. Roy was left alone with his thoughts. This damned Lennon had dared to take such a dirty step. Of course, Linda was not Tracy, but he still wouldn't allow her to be insulted. The medical center was bustling with activity around the clock. Linda paced the corridor nervously. Everything should be fine with Mom. The girl repeated this mantra all the time. Exhausted, she sat down by the wall. Suddenly, someone stopped next to her. Linda recognized the man who promised to help. He said he saw how much she needed the money. The girl did not object. It really was so. A thought flashed through Mel's mind about why Roy Thorne hadn't helped her, but he didn't ask it out loud yet. But the girl, as if guessing his thoughts, explained herself that she did not want to pester her friends and relatives with her problems. Mel looked at Linda carefully and thought about something intensely. A black car stopped at the central entrance to the medical center. Stan Baker got out and ran to the hospital. Linda and a tall blond man came out to meet him. "Who the hell is this?" Stan asked the man. He snorted contemptuously. "But who allowed this scum to talk like that? Let him get out of here immediately." Stan took a fighting stance and explained that Linda meant a lot to Roy Thorne, so she was under his protection. If a man had bad intentions, let him imagine it. Mel simply exploded with amazing energy. She was so powerful that Stan couldn't stay on his feet. He was thrown back to the car. The guy realized that he had a pretty strong opponent, but he had to protect Linda somehow. He rushed forward, shouting at the girl to run away faster. Mel stopped the guy with a professional kick. The wall was thrown up several meters, and then he fell down on his back. The blonde wasn't going to stop. He decided to finish off his opponent. Stan knew he might not be able to withstand the next blow. However, Linda saved him. She yelled at them to stop fighting. Mel sarcastically asked why the girl didn't ask Roy Thorne for money for her mother's treatment, since she was under his protection. Linda stood there, stunned. She remembered Roy at different points in his life. It had been too much for her to ask him for help. She thought she could handle it on her own. Finally, the girl understood what was happening. She asked the stranger not to harm Roy. If he wanted to take her away, she would go with him herself. But don't touch Roy. Lennon laughed loudly. Too late. Thorne had crossed him first. Now he would have to pay for it. Then he looked at Stan and mockingly said that the little girl was asking him not to kill. He would give in. Let the rival live. For now. Linda screamed angrily. If that's the case, let the man pay for her mother's treatment. He promised. Mel replied that all the events had nothing to do with the girl or her mother. And what's more, he really had promised. In the Lennon family, promises were kept. He would pay. But Linda was underneath him. The girl looked at him with naive blue eyes. She believed that he was a good man. Let him just try to harm Roy. She would not forgive it. Roy was meditating, his aura glowing with a calm blue light. He was balanced and focused. The guy remembered how Mel had drowned his bloody puppet. Now he needed to restore the blood. Mel Lennon was enough trouble. He would ruin a lot of his blood in the future. The mobile phone came to life. Puklik's number came up. Roy answered the call. Did something happen? Roy didn't like what he heard in response. The guy frowned angrily. His energy, which had been flowing in smooth waves just a few minutes ago, turned into a storm. Roy approached Lennon's yacht. Mel stood on the open area and watched him approach. Lennon asked sarcastically how he decided to come here. Roy was ready to kill the enemy. But Mel wasn't joking either. He told Roy to say goodbye to life. The guy was determined. He told Mel not to even think about killing him, because Roy himself would show him such hell now. Lennon responded by asking Roy to join a farewell party thrown especially for him. The guy just jumped over the side of the yacht. But what he saw made him stop. Lying in the middle of the deck was Linda. She was dressed in a smart dress and surrounded by flowers. Everything was arranged as if she were dead. But the girl was still breathing. She was alive. What was that bastard up to? Lily was tied to the mast. The final touch. Mel tugged at the sheet covering some kind of chest. It turned out that it wasn't a chest but a coffin, and Stan was in the coffin. Mal was pleased with the effect. He saw Roy turn pale. It put him in a good mood. Did he like the surprise? The guy didn't understand what this performance was for. What was Mel going to do? Lennon replied that it was simple. The plan was called wedding, and Roy would be the funeral gift. The guy understood what was being said. A posthumous marriage, isn't that too much? Mel laughed madly. It was all over. The boy had no help. Even Olivia couldn't help him, unless she didn't care about the Bai family. And he had already sent people there. On the Demon Star, such things were normal for Roy. But here? The boy carefully felt for his scythe with his hand. Mel watched him from under his forehead. They stood opposite each other. Who would attack first? With his scythe pulled far behind his back, Roy attacked first. Mel was covered by a guard. Scythe ran into the guard and recoiled. Roy didn't expect anything else. He had to think of something else. He grabbed the demonic sword, which was shimmering blood red. The guard became nervous. Roy moved from top to bottom. The bloody energy of the sword passed through the enemy, dividing him in half. Roy looked at the dead man carefully. It was too early to relax. Behind the guy, as soon as he started to walk, 3 enraged furies rose into the air. Roy turned to face them, along with his lion. What the hell was this? The furies looked like ordinary girls. There was just one thing. They had snake tongues. Roy launched an energy charge. They landed on the deck of the yacht. The sudden movement above did not go unnoticed by the guy. A man with a huge axe was flying towards him. But he didn't manage to fly down. The swarm scythe stopped the man halfway. All the victims were engulfed in bloody flames, and the bald man with the axe, and Mel's bodyguard. And it grabbed the furies by their forked tongues. Roy glanced at Mal. What next? He smiled cheekily. Good. Roy decided that he wouldn't hold back either. He used the demonic technique, Bloody Child. The red energy in the form of a spiral flower opened its petals and revealed a baby with a mouth full of sharp teeth. For a moment, nothing happened. Roy and Matt looked at each other. There were quite a few spectators watching them. Then the child slipped out of the flower and rushed forward like an arrow. It grew ominously. Roy was attacked by several young men at once. The boy rejected them one by one with his protective aura. The baby chose its first victim. It grabbed the shaved head of one of the guards. A moment later, the man's head was gone. Mel watched this bloody spectacle from a distance. Roy said that today they would all become his food. After a while, there were only corpses on the deck. Roy and his assistants dealt with all of Mel's bodyguards. It's the end for Lennon. He calmly said that he had to admit Thorne's extraordinary strength. No one expected the guy to survive an attack by more than 100 specialists. Mel walked around the large energy sphere and continued. Roy's power had almost reached level S. It was only a little bit short. However, Mel himself has a full S rank, so the guy has no chance. Roy responded that Mel's stored energy would be to his taste. He raised a wave of his energy and threw it into the attack. The forces converged, but the white chalk energy absorbed the black swarm. Roy watched in amazement. No way, it almost worked. But almost is not a victory. Lennon was reaching forward, sending more charges. Thorne should be grateful that he was going to be killed by Mel Lennon himself. Roy prepared to repel the attack, but the lion covered him with his body. The charge hit the lion. The bloody child looked at Roy with fear. He ordered to eat the murdered assistant. The cub came to life and sank its teeth into the still warm corpse. Roy asked Mel if he was ready to die right now. Lennon barked at the boy to shut up. Let him try this instead. The baby looked up from its meal. It waited tensely for the inevitable catastrophe. Mel attacked with powerful streams of energy, shouting for Roy to die and stop interfering with the lives of others. The guy stepped back as far as he could, leaving the ridges of protection in front of him. It's time to act. The bloody baby, having received the command, started off. He flew above the deck, cutting through the air. He held a scythe in his hands. Black and red energy swirled around him, creating a strong protective barrier. At the same time, Roy rushed to attack. He flew slightly higher, holding the broad-bladed sword tightly in his hand. Mel concentrated on defending himself from the kid and lost sight of the guy, who managed to strike his opponent in the arm with his sword. A bolt of energy flew out of Mel's hand, which he was going to attack with. It did no harm. But Roy, having gathered maximum energy, killed her with it so that Lennon was blown to the edge of the deck. He sat there, stunned, leaning on his hands to keep from falling. Roy came closer and laughed triumphantly. He had a strong opponent, but that strength would not save him today. Mal struggled to his feet. He said he had never met a time traveler as strong as Thorn, and he suggested they have a great time. He lunged forward again, and a stream of energy rushed towards Roy. The guy tried to cut her with a sword, but she was too powerful. The sword flew out of his hands. The energy opened its mouth to devour Roy. Nobody paid any attention to the baby, who at that moment was quietly crawling on the floor. Mel laughed furiously. Is this all the famous Roy Thorn can do? What a disappointment. Roy parried the attack and, rubbing his mouth, praised his opponent out loud. Not bad. Let Mel continue. Is he weak? Or maybe we should show Lennon what a real attack means. Mel shouted irritably that if Roy dreamed of dying quickly, then now he would make that dream come true. He pounced on the guy, attacking him almost point blank. Roy mockingly drawled that it was somehow coming out a bit weak. Maybe we should order food delivery to give Mel a little boost. Lennon was furious. He hit Roy on the head with all his might, and it didn't have the desired effect. Roy continued to sneer. Where was Mel Lennon's vaunted power? Or had he not yet used it all? Well then Roy will use his power. Mel was literally blown away. He flew backwards into the mast and hung onto it, holding on with his hand. Gritting his teeth in anger, he muttered that he liked it when his prey resisted. It was much more interesting that way. Roy screamed that he was not prey but a time traveler, and a unique one at that. He took a running start, and in a jump, kicked the mast with all his might at a place above Lily and below Chalk. The mast snapped in half. The ropes holding Lily flew apart from the blow, and she came to her senses. Roy managed to catch her, not allowing her to fall. At that moment, a noticeable blow to his back made him cry out in pain. Lennon did not miss the opportunity to hit his opponent. Lily's eyes widened. This is all because of her. The guy replied that none of this was important now. Linda had to be saved. Lily could help. The girl jumped up. She understood what was required of her. She assured him that she would do everything properly. She ran away, while Roy slowly rose to continue the fight with Mel. The same one was about to attack. He muttered that he hated it when his family was touched. Thorn shouldn't have done that. And now, nothing could be changed. He would die, and that would be it. Lily scooped Linda up in her arms. Roy screamed at them to run faster. He would handle the rest. Mel fired at the guy. No need to even try to hide. He won't let his plans be ruined. Roy dodged the attack and suddenly elbowed his opponent in the stomach. He won't allow arbitrariness either. Mel grabbed the guy with both hands and squeezed with all his might. What do you mean he won't allow it? Roy isn't the boss here, and if necessary, Mel will quickly subdue him. Roy slid to the floor, blood flowing from his mouth and eyes. Lennon turned to the girls. They hoped to escape? In vain. After all, it all started with Lily. He would deal with her first to pay tribute to the memory of his deceased relative. Roy quickly regained consciousness. Lennon's vital energy was insane, and it's good that the guy managed to absorb the power of his bloody apostates. He caught up with Mel and dealt him a crushing blow to the jaw. Now Mel will regret being born in this world. Lennon lost his footing. Part of the mast lay nearby. He grabbed her and rushed at the guy. Roy stopped him with his bare hands, grabbing the broken mast so that it folded like an accordion. And it was at that moment that Mel realized that in record time, he had become stronger. Much stronger. Roy explained sincerely and with pleasure. Chalk's power is due to his life energy. Roy gets his power when he absorbs the energy of others. Lennon is his final target on his way to S rank. Mal was scared. He looked at the guy and realized that his chances for victory were lost. The next moment, Roy sent him to another world. The guy went to check on Linda. She was still unconscious. He smiled triumphantly at the girls. The Bai estate was crowded. The doctor examined Roy, checking his health. Gina ordered to examine the guy as carefully as possible. Because he couldn't have come out unharmed after the fight. There's definitely something wrong with him, but he might be hiding it. Linda had just come to her senses. She didn't understand what was happening. Gina explained that Roy had recently gone up with a bad guy. They needed to make sure he was okay. It wouldn't be a bad idea to check on Linda too. Lily sat next to the old man. She watched Gina's incredible activity. It was astonishing. In the Bai family, she was the only one so restless. The old man answered good-naturedly that young people usually have a lot of energy. And that's normal. Lily was worried. What would happen next? The Bai family was safe. Roy had defeated Mel. But would the alliance leave them alone? After all, the Lennon family seemed to have quite a high status. Olivia explained that the top of the alliance is the governing coalition. Few have heard of it, but the Lennon family is the core of this coalition. Lily's face fell in surprise. How did Olivia know such details? But instead of Olivia, Gina answered, NatureMed is always aware of almost all events. Roy joined the conversation. He knew that all the Lennon and Maine property was in this city. The guy thought it was quite possible to take it over peacefully. All this information was provided to Roy by Puklik. He did a good job. The old man said he was sure the boy would stay in their city, but given the threat from the alliance, he would advise contacting his family. Roy replied that he would not do that. He had his own plans. The city was slowly enveloped in twilight. At the Lennon estate, Audrey was talking to her husband, Alexander Williams. He asked what Madame Lennon thought about recent events. The woman looked tired and confused. She asked again if her brother was really dead. This question surprised and worried Alex. All the elders had already reported this information. Did Audrey really think it could be false? The woman didn't know the answer. She invited Alex to sit down. She was worried about whether their organization, NatureMed, could really keep her safe. The man couldn't answer clearly. This situation bothered not only her. Mel had better fighting skills and strength, but he was gone. Perhaps it would be best to hire security now. Audrey suddenly rushed to Alex. She was desperate. The woman was ready to sell 90% of the family's assets to get protection. Webster calmed her down as best he could. No need to be so nervous. NatureMed promised to take care of her, and promises from such an organization were practically law. Audrey's eyes lit up with hope. Could they kill Roy Thorne? She was willing to give up the remaining 10% of the assets for that. Alex tried to explain that it was impossible. There was one influential person from NatureMed who wouldn't let the guy be killed because he had his own plans for him. The woman sighed in disappointment. Alex quickly explained that for them this guy was just a test rabbit for experiments. He himself would soon swell up. He just had to be patient for a little while. Gina arrived at the office of the Media Group Corporation. Walking down the corridor, she was surprised. Just look at how influential the organization NatureMed turned out to be. It turns out that even Media Group belongs to them. The girl stopped at the window, admiringly looking at the city from above. She was joined by Alex Webster. Gina came to report something about Roy Thorne. The girl called her husband Uncle Alex. There's not much to tell about Roy. He's always digging into the Lennon and Maine assets. Webster chuckled. Gina remembered that Thorne was also very interested in Linda's past. What kind of relationship were they in anyway? The husband invited her to come into the office so that it would be more convenient to talk. Gina obediently followed him. What important information did he have? Alex cleared his throat and started from afar. What he was about to tell would turn the girl's world upside down. Was she ready for that? Gina froze. She felt strange, curious, and a little timid. Alex continued. If Gina wants, she can even share this information with Thorne. He is still being protected by interested parties. The girl was completely confused. What an intrigue. At Roy's house, Audrey was looking for information about Linda. Everything seemed very strange to her. The guy realized that, in essence, he had not managed to find out anything. Audrey confirmed. But what was alarming was that Linda looked incredibly similar to Tracy. Roy said that Gina promised to find the necessary information in NatureMed. However, However, in exchange for this, they demand secret information about the demon star. Roy was very upset. Audrey categorically replied that such an exchange of information was absolutely out of the question. Suddenly, an idea struck Roy. He brightened up. His methods were unusual for most people, weren't they? Contacting Gina, he asked her to find a place to meet tomorrow. The car stopped near the park. Roy got out and looked around carefully. In his opinion, everything was calm. Then Linda came out. The girl was worried. Yesterday Roy was attacked and today they were walking in the park. Is it safe? Roy replied that they would only meet with acquaintances. Everything would be fine. Linda asked again in surprise, how could he be sure? Olivia leaned over to her and quietly explained that Roy was there to protect her. The girl calmed down a little. Gina Bai and her grandfather were sitting on the riverbank. Old fishermen. The girl couldn't sit still from impatience. Roy was late. Why wasn't he here yet? Roy heard this and decided to laugh. Had she already missed him? You have to arrange a meeting with him in advance, and he doesn't meet for free. Gina immediately boiled over. She hated being laughed at. The guy pretended not to notice her anger and continued. Of course, he would make a small allowance for her. They weren't strangers. The girl pulled herself together and invited him to go into the summer restaurant. Alexander was already waiting at the table. The husband greeted her politely. Roy was wary. Gina hadn't warned that there would be strangers at the meeting. The girl explained that Alexander Webster was the deputy chief secretary of the NatureMed branch in their city and the head of the department. The husband invited them to sit down. Roy, however, had no intention of sitting down at the table. He said that he was not interested in tea ceremonies. He needed information on two matters. Alex, not hiding his sarcasm, noted that Mr. Thorne was clearly biased against their organization. Instead of answering, Roy showed the man the ghostly outlines of the two people he had killed. Then he explained that the two had broken into his house the previous night. Alex was stunned. Gina admitted that it was the work of bandits. Roy snorted contemptuously. He was willing to forget about the events of the previous night in exchange for some information. Webster agreed to answer the question, within his authority, of course. The guy pointed at Linda, who was hiding behind him. Is this girl a wanderer between worlds? Alex stood up abruptly. The guy already knew about the origin of this world. It seemed Roy knew more than he expected. Yes, she was a traveler. But her situation was special, and he has no right to reveal the details. Roy, narrowing his eyes, looked closely at Webster. It seemed that the man was not lying. Then the second question. If Roy decides to get rid of his Thorne family, will they stop him? The question stumped Webster. He hadn't expected to hear that, and he had no answer. When Roy left, Alex and Gina told the old man about the conversation. He asked again if he had understood correctly. Roy Thorne was going to become the head of the Thorne clan? Alex thought out loud. The Thorne family had good connections at NatureMed. That was probably what the guy was interested in. Gina asked how influential the Thorne family was. Influential? But the Thornes are one of the richest and most powerful families in the country. Their influence extends to all areas of life, and their power is simply astounding. The girl looked thoughtfully after the departing guy. And he is brave. He fights the Alliance, and he is also going to confront his own family. Roy moved automatically with an absent look. Linda asked worriedly if he was okay. The guy reassured her. Everything was fine. He was just thinking. His thoughts revolved around the information he had received. Linda is not Tracy. But still, a part of her? Tracy's soul was destroyed. So only a part of her is in Linda's body. That's why he couldn't see the connection between them. Stan interrupted his thoughts. He ran towards him. Everything the owner asked to know was ready. Roy was delighted. Excellent. What clues did the guy find? Where is she? Stan replied that the headquarters of the North Atlantic Alliance is located. Roy cried out impatiently that they needed to go there immediately. He ordered Stan to take Linda home, and he went about his business. The huge house with a wide driveway was shining with illuminated windows. A guard stopped the car at the closed gates. He asked to show the invitation to the feast. Roy showed the postcard through the lowered window. He was invited to come inside and wished a good evening. Olivia called from the back seat. What's the owner up to? Roy explained that there should be a treasury at the Alliance headquarters, and in it, what they need. Olivia was shocked. She had worked with the Alliance for a long time, but she was not allowed anywhere near this information. How did Roy manage to find out so quickly? The guy laughed. He doesn't reveal his secrets. They got out of the car. Olivia looked at the lighted windows with fear. She was timid. Is the owner sure? The girl entered the large hall alone. Everything here was lush and pompous. The waiter came and offered her a glass of wine. She took it automatically, lost in her thoughts. Suddenly, someone snatched the glass from her hand. Olivia looked up and saw Gina by. What was Roy Thorne's plan? NatureMed had barely managed to settle the conflict with the Lennon family. Things were much more complicated with the alliance. Olivia frowned, said she didn't expect to meet anyone she knew here. What does Gina want? The girl suggested going to a quieter place to talk. At the same time, Roy was standing on the roof of the building. He sent his scouts into the house through the chimney opening. It was a group of fireflies. They quickly flew around the rooms, allowing the guy to see and hear everything that was happening inside. Seeing Gina, Roy became thoughtful. It seems that NatureMed knows much more than he imagined. The girls retreated to a spare room. Gina excitedly told Olivia that they urgently needed to find Linda's soul fragments. Her soul is fading now. If we don't find other pieces, something irreparable will happen. Olivia jumped up from her seat in fear. Roy must already know about this. Is this really the reason we are here? Gina handed the girl a small box. This should help Lindy. Olivia was in no hurry to take it. Why shouldn't Ginny give it directly to the owner? The girl burst into anger. Her cheeks turned red. Why? Because he teases and teases her every time. She wants to suppress him for it. Roy heard everything upstairs. He started laughing. The lady turned out to have a delicate mental constitution. What do you need that for? The swarm spies fireflies continued their work. They reached the entrance to the treasury. One of them flew around, showing everything that was around. The guy found it strange that there were no surveillance cameras anywhere, but that didn't stop him. He snapped his fingers. At this command, one of the fireflies changed its image and turned into Freeman. He walked up to a door with a large combination lock. Clenching his fist, he accumulated energy in it and directed it all at the door. The energy began to spin like propeller blades. Roy watched in amazement. It seemed like it would be even easier than he had expected. He gave the order to move forward. The energy of the fake Freeman erupted. A large hole with jagged edges appeared in the armored door of the treasury. Now it was possible to enter inside. In the treasury itself, under the walls, there were drawers with sliding doors. In the middle was a receptacle for treasures. The gold shimmered and shimmered in the uncertain light. Roy stood above, dumbfounded. Most of the treasure in the treasury belonged to peoples of other planets, destroyed back when he was on the Demon Star. The boy thought. This world was full of secrets, and they needed to be dealt with. But Tracy's soul was a priority. Freeman's double in the treasury listened. He was alarmed by the noise. The sudden burst of energy hit me unexpectedly and powerfully. The swarm above felt the blow. What had happened? Were his spies attacked? The man standing in the middle of the treasury could not understand how the intruders managed to get in. It was not easy. He turned to the fake Freeman. Who is he? A puppet? A demon? Although what difference does it make? It's all the same to him, a slipper. He looked closely at the uninvited guest. The guy was shaking with horror. There was an explosion of such incredible power that everything around simply turned white. The world lost its colors. Roy realized that the treasury was guarded by a monster from the Great Heaven Descendants clan. This was a problem, because Roy's strength was S rank, but the monster's strength was several times greater. Roy couldn't lose. Not now. He had to save Tracy. Together with the demons of heaven and earth, he descended into the treasury of the North Atlantic Alliance. A monster in human form was waiting for him. It was a mountain of muscle. He was surprised by the boy's determination. Not everyone would dare to come down to him. What was his name? Because killing the nameless was not in his rules. Roy asked a counter-question. Is the monster a descendant of the great heavens? His manners are very similar to them. The opponent realized that the guy was from the Demon Star. Does he have something to say at the end? He's going to die now. Behind Roy, two huge energy waves rose up, black and white. These were the demons of heaven and earth about to attack. The guardian monster felt the hair on his head stand on end. The attacking whirlwind swept past Roy, leaving him barely able to stay on his feet. Two waves captured the monster in a mad embrace. He fought back as best he could. Roy controlled these waves. He made them twist into a black and white spiral. It was a fusion of hellish souls. Then, the spiral began to stretch out in length and turn into a cone. Roy pointed the top of the cone at the monster. It was a straight road to hell. The cone was steadily approaching the monster. He watched it with an inscrutable expression on his face. At the last moment, he put his hand in front of himself, defending himself. The black and white cone lost its shape, and streams of energy seemed to splash out to the sides. Roy was angry. This damned clan of Great Heaven descendants was expelled from Demon Star by Roy for their lawlessness and crimes. But he did not destroy them all. But now, he will fix it. The monster held onto his defense with all his might. The black and white waves pressed and pressed on him. He was exhausted. Roy increased the pressure. He couldn't help it. He had to win this fight. The opponent couldn't hold on. The cone crashed into him, piercing him through. He blinked his eyes in amazement. How did this happen? Roy was content with the triumph of justice. The scions were worse than wild beasts. Let the last of them die at the hands of the Lord of Hell. The monster asked for mercy. He could be useful and do all the dirty work for the guy. Roy got tired of listening to him whine. He hit the monster with all his might, sending him flying to who knows where. The guy waved goodbye to him. Suddenly, the idea arose that in this world he would meet more than one old acquaintance. Roy quickly walked into the depths of the treasury. There stood a large chest covered in symbols and hieroglyphs. A soft green glow emanated from it like a light haze. The guy stopped in amazement. Stan did indeed convey the truth. It was a soul accumulation tripod. Suddenly, the recent monster appeared from behind Roy's shoulder. What the hell? Where did he come from? He was finished. But the monster probably didn't think so. It attacked. Since the guy treated him cruelly, now he won't be spared either. Let him not even dream of pardon. Roy sat on the floor, not really listening to his words. Then he asked if the monster had already said everything, because he was fed up with this nonsense. He rushed forward like a madman. But he did not run into Roy, but into the energy of the demons of heaven and earth. Caught between its two parts, the monster no longer had a chance to escape. Roy, stepping aside, said that he had 3 seconds to realize his end. He tried to break free and shouted that this was the end for Roy. He managed to reach the guy with one hand. Dying, he chose to drag his rival to the other world with him. But behind Roy were 2 demons of heaven and earth. He was confident of his victory. The opponent screamed in despair. Roy finally called their clan famous charlatans who never did anything useful, but only wagged their tongues and gave him a good thrashing. The monster flew straight into the arms of the demons. Demon Star lost hundreds of thousands of people before destroying the descendant clan. From the accumulated anger and resentment, Hell developed a special method to destroy them. Roy said that this move was called Sky Conquest. He covered the monster's face with his hand. He screamed in pain. But he still managed to hiss that the Demon Star should have been destroyed much earlier. For the Patriarch's greatest mistake was to allow the slaves to live. Roy said mockingly that the people would definitely erect a monument to him as a hero. And he squeezed his fingers tighter. The monster screamed furiously. Suddenly, Roy let him go and left. The monster no longer interested him. He looked at the tripod again. What an incredible treasure. Now Tracy's soul would definitely be saved. As if remembering something, the guy returned to his silent rival. Let him go to hell. The demons of heaven and earth rushed to carry out their master's order. With huge sticks, they pushed the monster straight into the floor. A moment later, only a wet black spot remained as a reminder of it. Looking at her, Roy made a vow to find out exactly what happened to the Demon Star back then. A little later, the guy's car drove out of the gate. Olivia and Gina were sitting in the back. They both noticed that he was in a good mood. The girls asked if he was able to find what he wanted. Roy mischievously stuck his tongue out at them. Let them try to guess for themselves. While the guy was distracted from driving, the car crashed into something and stopped. Roy jumped out of the car and tried to understand what had happened. In front of him, right in the middle of the road, stood a stone statue of some kind of chimera. He peered closely. Incredible! It was a gargoyle. A blue glow flashed in the chimera's eye sockets.